Hey everybody, happy Tuesday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is March 22nd. We are marching through into spring, which is a good thing all the way around. We've got a great lineup on today's show, and we get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Brian Behlendorf, who is the general manager for OpenSSF. They have a conversation about OpenSSF and how it has 19 new organizations that have joined to help identify and fix security vulnerabilities in open source software and develop improved tooling, training, research, best practices, and vulnerability disclosure practices. This is truly a worthwhile organization to get involved in, and Brian talks about some of the many things that OpenSSF is doing. So it's truly a great conversation. Want to check that one out for sure. After that, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast. This is part 2 of a 2-part conversation that Mike Jones, who is the host, is having with Zach M., who is with Cyber Defense Services, and they have a very wide-ranging conversation. As always, Mike has on his podcast, he goes over so many different topics, and in this one, they talk about pretty much everything from philosophy and psychology and what it means to be successful to egoist anarchism, power, happiness, and personal drive. Certainly a podcast that goes well beyond just the straight up cybersecurity conversations. Definitely want to check that one out as well. After that, we have a replay of our DevOps Unbound series. This is episode number 23, and it is called Bringing Chaos to DevOps. And in this one, Mitch Ashley is joined by Tammy Buteau, who was with I think it's StatType or StateType, I'm not quite sure, and Paul Bruce from Tricentis, and they're talking about some of the principles and best practices of chaos engineering and how organizations can effectively implement chaos engineering and chaos testing to ensure resiliency. This is definitely a must-listen to conversation. If your organization is even considering chaos engineering, there are some really great kind of best practices and tips to consider in this conversation, so check it out. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2022 virtual event we hosted a couple months ago. This one features Jim Walker, who was the principal product evangelist over at Cockroach Labs. He has an academic discussion called Principles of the CAP Theorem and a Cloud-Native Database. And in this one, Jim explores the 3 guarantees, deliver a definition for each, and outline how each might affect a distributed system. It's, as I said, it's an academic discussion, and hopefully he hopes that it will help you understand the history of the CAP theorem and how to use this important concept to your advantage in cloud-native environments and cloud-native databases. Every little bit helps. So this is a great presentation. If your organization is using cloud-native databases, definitely one to check out. After that, I'm back and I've got the headlines for you. Then I have a great conversation with Joe Partlow, who is the CTO over at ReliaQuest. We talk about cybersecurity, the talent shortage in cybersecurity, cybersecurity tool sprawl, and how organizations need to and really should address cybersecurity tool sprawl. So many things can go wrong when they don't have a handle on what cybersecurity technologies they're using. We did say in the conversation that the majority of organizations have one staff member managing more than 4 tools in so many organizations, and really that's maybe one too many. It's a great conversation we have. Definitely want to check this one out. And then after that, I am back with the webinars preview for you. And then we close things out with The View with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Om Vyas, who is the Chief Product Officer over at Oak9. And they talk about the importance of having a security person become part of every DevOps team. It is a great conversation, and it is certainly a topic that we've covered a lot in the past, and the rules have not changed, folks. We still need to have security in DevOps, and Om and Mike discuss really why this is so important. It's a great lineup on today's show, and we are going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
All right, we are back. Kicking off today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we have a conversation between Alan and Brian Behlendorf, who is the general manager over at OpenSSF. OpenSSF recently announced 19 new organizations have joined OpenSSF to help identify and fix security vulnerabilities in open source software. They're also doing some really amazing work, including helping to develop improved tooling, training, research, best practices, and vulnerability disclosure practices. They've got a lot going on, and it's totally worthy, and this is a great conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm really happy to be joined once again by Brian Behlendorf. Brian is with the Open Source Security Foundation, or OSSF as we say, part of the Linux Foundation. Hey Brian, welcome to Techstrong. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Alan. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So Brian, I think most of our audience at this point, I hope anyway, they heard OSSF before. Excuse me. But for those who haven't, if you don't mind, just why don't you give them a quick sort of primer? What's the OSSF about?
Of course. Well, the Open Source Security Foundation got its start about 2 years ago, actually, at the Linux Foundation, where there are a bunch of folks asking really deep questions about, are there some flaws or some problems with the way that we in the open source community write code when it comes to trying to really answer some deep security questions and address the fact that open source code is now critical infrastructure out there. It's not just a nice optional, nice to have. It's like major parts of society, perhaps every part of society runs on top of software, and open source software is so core to that. So it's worth asking, what are things we can do to systematically improve the state of security across the entirety of the open source landscape? And so a bunch of organizations came together and started working, and individuals, really volunteers, started to sort themselves into different working groups. Some focused on education, some focused on the supply chain, some focused on tooling and how vulnerability disclosures happen inside the community. Formed a bunch of working groups, formed a bunch of projects out of those working groups, and realized that they've got something here that really has some legs. And so in October, we pulled together a set of organizations to provide some funding to go and empower these different working groups and projects and fund them to build new tooling, to build more educational resources, and really go help the rest of the open source community answer what, with Log4j in December and with so many other incidents are only really clearly an important thing to address.
Absolutely. Brian, look, I'm a big believer in the OSSF. I'm glad that it has come together and it's gaining the kind of momentum that it has. I think, excuse me, I think, with the the primacy of open source, let's call it, right? With open source being just such a powerhouse in terms of the software and software development, we need something like the Open Source Security Foundation, right? To make sure that open source is secure, the open source we're using is secure, that there are best practices, that there is oversight, that that everything that you guys do, it's got to be part of the job. So, really happy to see your success over the last 2 years. You guys recently announced a project, I think it was called Alpha Omega, the Alpha Omega project. Look, even a Jewish boy like me knows the Alpha and the Omega, right? The beginning and the end. Well, I did go to St. John's, so I got have an excuse. But anyway, talk to us. What is the Alpha Omega project?
Well, the Alpha Omega project started as a white paper exploring, what are some of the most critical needs that go unmet out there in the open source landscape. And there's kind of a recognition that there's different needs from different ends of the spectrum, from the well-resourced and very well-organized open source projects like, say, the Python Foundation or Node.js community or the Apache Software Foundation or many of the projects at the Linux Foundation. Those you don't want to necessarily, perhaps the use of the word alpha is controversial, but these are projects that have a very big footprint, right, as large organizations. But some of them don't have well-resourced security teams. Some of them haven't yet adopted some of the best practices and standards that are out there for how to differentiate well-run open source projects. Some of them could use a little bit of help. And so the alpha side of the Alpha Mega project is try to identify ways to help the 100 or 200 top open source initiatives, projects, foundations, however you want to think about it, with essentially consulting, advisory work that then might lead to, well, here's an opportunity to spend some funds to go and make a step function improvement for that organization. And it might be as simple as having a full-time person working on their security team to help triage reports that come in and manage a disclosure process. It might be, here's a critical piece we don't have the resources or volunteers to do a third-party audit on. So let's provide some funding focused on that. And then the other end of the spectrum, say the top 10,000 open source projects. These are any components that are in kind of any degree of moderate use or above. What are some ways that we might systematically scan those projects and look for things that are worrisome, things that might be like, all right, here's the bug in log4j. It had to do with taking unparsed input and trying to parse it for format string, or sorry, unvalidated input, parse it for format strings, and then feed that to a parser. That's kind of an anti-pattern. That's kind of a problem, and it's really hard to make that secure. How many other open source projects do that same kind of thing? And can we use tooling to systematically see, are there additional log4js out there, right, based on that or based on others? So it would use all the standard tools out there, CodeQL or other scanning tools, but it would also engage the open source community in trying to figure out what are the better questions to ask of this kind of infrastructure once you have a scanning infrastructure like that set up. And then how do we work with maintainers to, if we find problematic scenarios, get them fixed? Think of this like an open source project zero, if you will. And so this span was put forward in a white paper by Michael Scavetta at Microsoft, and Microsoft and Google really started to rally around it. We've raised $5 million now to go and start to put this together. It's a very human-intensive process, and so we've put out the first 3 job descriptions for individuals we need to hire to help us manifest this work. And so we've got those job descriptions up. And if any of you in the open source space who have a cybersecurity background are interested, please take a look at those open jobs. But it's a long-term kind of bold initiative to try to provide the same safety for open source projects that one might expect other companies do for their own proprietary products.
So I got to ask the question because you brought it up. So where did they go to look?
At openssf.org, we've got the jobs posted there, as well as at the Linux Foundation website, of course.
Fantastic. This is a bold initiative, Brian, right? It's Alpha Omega. But what I like about it, though, is the big guys, if you will, right? Though, and it's the same thing in many of the foundations today, right? rightfully so, these big mega projects that have 1 billion plus downloads and more, right? They get a lot of the attention, and they should, right? Because if you have a security problem in one of them, we all have a security problem. But what's nice about this is that you're taking the lessons from those big and the processes developed from those big projects and making them available to some of the smaller projects. And some of them may grow up to be big projects. Some may not, right? Some may stay what they are. And that's okay, but they're all entitled to be, and we deserve to have them all secured as best as possible.
Absolutely. Looking at the long tail of open source projects and how to help them upgrade, and how to help them be more secure by default is a really big focus for us. One of the illustrations of this is, so we funded some research with Harvard that came out 2 weeks ago called the Open Source Census. Actually, this is the second edition of that. So it's called the Census 2. That was published out there, and it gives a whole lot of basically top 50 lists of projects in the open source space that are deemed critical, actually, and critical by different criteria, critical to based on usage that we get from data that comes from some of the SCA vendors out there to try to really understand what pieces depend upon what, because we want to find the next log4j. We want to find the next component everybody relies upon and everyone's kind of taken for granted, and really help make sure that we're focusing attention and resources on those unsung heroes of open source. Now, in that 10,000, there's going to be a lot of these others, right? And we're going to need to continue to do more work, more research, more outreach to figure out where those other dependencies might be that could be problematic down the road. One of the interesting things that the census turned up, though, was there is a really big distinction between some of the different ecosystems out there. In the NPM ecosystem, for example, in the Node ecosystem, there's a very big tendency towards single developer projects where each module is like 100 lines of code and written by one person. And, that to me represents a risk because, if it's one person attached to that code, that person disappears, gets hit by a bus, as we say, the bus factor on that project is pretty low. That could be a problem. So one thing we're trying to also ask is what are some other signals that we might use to try to determine when a critical project is at risk? What are ways that we could suggest they be helpful? What might happen if you took 5 of those projects and suggest the 5 developers work together on kind of a single module that had those 5 different pieces together, and then reduce the bus factor of that aggregate kind of whole? So lots of these interesting kind of conversations going on inside the OpenSSF about ways that we can be helpful to both the alpha projects and the long tail, and really thinking hard about the kind of open source community that we've arrived at over the last couple of years.
Love it. Good stuff. Brian, I'm a fan. I love the progress you guys are making in a short time. So hearing these kinds of things makes me feel good. I want to pivot, if we can, a little bit and talk about this kind of upcoming OSSF, opportunities or shows and so forth where you'll be at and events you're putting on. June's a big month. There's a big Linux Foundation event. What was it, June 20 to 22nd?
Yeah, so the week of June 20 to 24th in Austin is basically framed by the Open Source Summit, which is the main Linux Foundation event for all of its different communities. During that summit, there's a track called Supply Chain Security Con, which will be focused on all the different issues that come up in the types of work that we do. There's the CFP for that just closed, and we have a bumper crop of submissions that we're working through now. So we'll get the schedule for that published pretty soon. But there's lots of reasons to come to Austin in that week. There's also at the beginning of that week an OpenSSF Day where we'll pull together the leaders of our different communities under OpenSSF, talk about the projects going on, talk about where things might head. Anybody who wants to get more involved or wants to know more about what we're doing, please come to that event. There'll be some webcasting from that too, some streaming, but this is also perhaps the first chance in 2 years for this community to really meet face to face. And so we plan to take advantage of that. And then there's another event at the tail end of that week, one called the Critical Software Summit, which would be all about what are the issues involved now that the software is essentially the roads and bridges of modern infrastructure. So stick around for that week, at the end of that week on the Friday, as well as the Global Software Vulnerability Summit, which will be focused on how do we find bugs, get them fixed, and get them distributed, and all those kinds of issues that come up. And so that's been announced, and there's the CFP is still open for that, and that'll be on Friday as well. So that week in Austin, come if you can. There'll be other things going on soon too, now that conferences are starting to pick up, people are starting to travel again. So, and we've still got a heavy list of a heavy kind of focus on webinars and other kind of virtual events and outreach. And of course, our community is wide open. So anybody, anywhere globally, we want you all involved in the working groups and the conversations, or even just show up and ask questions. We really know we've got an educational and community building task to do ahead of us. So I really, everyone is welcome.
No kidding. Hey, the whole week it's Linux Foundation. What's the name of the whole?
The Open Source Summit.
Just the Open Source Summit.
Yeah, yep. we do one of these in America, one in Europe, and one in Europe each year, and one in Japan when we can, and had been doing one in China. Obviously, we all hope to get back to that at some point soon.
Let's hope so.
And it's the week of June 20th, and if from years before COVID, I'm assuming it's going to be the same. Is one ticket is for the whole week. You don't need to get a special thing for Open Source Security Day or Supply Chain Day, or
There are some side events in this, but all those events I just mentioned are all one pass, one ticket to the whole thing.
I love it. I'm going to look in. We need to have a Techstrong presence there. Maybe we'll do some
broadcasting.
We'd love to have you there.
If so, Brian.
Yeah, we'll see you in person there. Different background, but we'd love to have you. All right, Brian, we're about out of time. Well, we're probably over time, but what the heck. Anything else on OSSF you want to keep the audience up to date with?
It's just the best kind of circus on the planet. There's lots of things happening. If you're deeply technical, good stuff happening in Project SigStore and Salsa and other places. We'd love to have you participating. If you want to focus on education and other kind of guides and things, lots of that we could involve you in there. So just come to the website openssf.org and raise your hand, and we'll put you to work or help you be smarter.
Brian, thanks so much for keeping us posted, man. Keep up the great work. Continued success with Open Source Security Foundation.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan. Take care.
Brian Bladesdorf with the Open OSSF here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, next up we have the Haunted Hacker Podcast. And in this one, Mike Jones is continuing his conversation with Zach M. of Cyber Defense Services. And their conversation runs the gamut from philosophy and psychology to success, egoist and anarchism, power, happiness, and personal drive, all with a healthy dose of cybersecurity sprinkled in. So, great conversation, as always. Let's roll it now.
A lot of people get to those areas of power because they're trying to change their own personal world. Like Elon Musk, right? When you look at what he's doing, he's not trying to make the world better. He's trying to make a living for himself and increase, his little world that he's in. And I totally agree with that. Like, he looks at things completely different than most people. But what I find interesting is there's like a whole wave of people lately that are looking to abstract themselves from like everything, and go on their own. Like the van living and the RVs and stuff like that. I see a lot of people that do that. And I started listening to some of those podcasts and listen to the way that they view the world and being dependent on all these constructs like you're talking about, and how it was weighing them down and how they couldn't get what they wanted out of life because they were so tied to these things that drove them crazy. And there's a whole culture behind that. And I find it really interesting. So proficiency, let's talk about that for a second. Tell me about the data center that you're working on that runs off of solar power. And to me, that's like the ultimate proficiency and efficiency when it comes to running something like that.
Yeah. Well, the reason behind that is because first I want to be free, right? I want to be able to move around where I want to. The stationary off-grid data center is under the planning and construction phases. The mobile data center is what I'm sitting in right now. I've revealed some of my solar systems to people, but I haven't revealed the data system itself. I've been very careful because the last thing I want is some company to replicate my shit and then be like, we're the first ones that did this, when they're not, right? There's nobody in the world that has put an off-grid 5G cloud data center inside a van. I don't know anybody who has a SOC center and off-grid cloud computing system running inside a van off of solar energy. I don't know anybody that did that. So I'm very careful with that. But in terms of efficiency, I think the most efficient thing out of it is that I own my infrastructure. I run my company off of that, and also off-grid infrastructure that's at several, different properties I own in smaller, medium, large sizes that I plan on centralizing into a giant off-grid data center that's stationary on a vacant property somewhere in the United States. But in terms of efficiency, it's efficient because you're not using Google, Amazon, Microsoft's crap, right? It's yours. Another thing is that you're not paying the massive energy bill that it takes to run this stuff, which can be pretty extreme. If anybody wants to look up Google's power bill for their data centers, it's absolutely insane, right? And also, I just so happen to be born into a time where you could have servers and data centers built out of maker boards and all kinds of things that you could get your dirty little hands on. You could run Docker on an Android phone if you want to, with how efficient the processors have become now. And people don't realize this. And you could tether computers together and increase their computing power collectively. There's all kinds of ways to do this, but people don't traditionally embark on the path I'm engaging in accomplishing this because it's not traditional. It's not taught. They don't know it exists. They think that maybe it's not efficient. It's kind of like when Nate O'Reilly, one of my guys that you see me talk to all the time and hang out with on LinkedIn, he really got big into blowing up the Raspberry Pi and using it, as a hub for everything you want to, and demonstrating that you don't need thousands of dollars equipment to build yourself a lab. Expanding upon this further are people like Todd Byers, who's over in the Florida Panhandle creating off-grid mini data centers scattered throughout his property that run on solar energy. I'm just taking it to a whole new level, right? And it makes sense. If you're running your stuff off-grid and computing devices are so small and so powerful, why wouldn't you make the extra effort to do so that you don't have to worry about that extra expense, which is massive? And then it frees me to do whatever I want. Like, it's my infrastructure. You don't tell me what kind of experiments I could run or do or not do with it. You don't tell me what I can and cannot do, period. It's mine. I own it. I made it, right? So in terms of efficiency, I guess that's efficient. And I could You could literally do whatever you want with Docker and Kubernetes. Like, the world is yours. If you know how to use Docker and Kubernetes, like, there's 1,000 native. The world of native Docker containers is insane. There's something for every application. It's a world of dreams for people that know how to use it. So that's why. I mean, it would go without saying that'd be the most logical move, right? You know?
Yeah, one of the things that really got me excited was when they came out with the Raspberry Pi. And I remember the first Raspberry Pi kind of distributed computing model that I built, and learning just, how much power is that little tiny board. I actually have one running right now that controls my 3D printer. It does everything. I literally don't have to do anything but upload a file and it's done.
Exactly.
So there's so many things you can do with it as well. Like, you can build your own cell phone with it. You can build a ham radio. You can build an FAA monitoring station. There's so many things. And I think that whole maker culture kind of goes back to where we started. When you had the USB dead drops, you had Pirate Box radio and NAS for Pirate Box. There's so much, I think, that's spun out of that. But I think what happened was a lot of it got commercialized and bastardized, right? And it went from being like a true maker culture to, let's rob that from the maker culture and throw it into an enterprise and build our product around it and charge ungodly amounts for this fucking product. But there's a lot of people like you out there, and there's a lot of makers that are really making innovation. I just hate to see it when they sell out and they end up selling everything they built over to a corporation, and then the corporation just runs it in the ground. I like to see the independent culture and the maker culture and the hacker culture thrive. And I think that's been a hindrance, man, because as a former hacker, it's like, well, as a current hacker too, the government likes to get involved with everything that you do, right? And God forbid you speak out about the government. I end up on lists and had money taken away and kept me from doing certain things in life. And that's where it kind of pisses me off, because all a lot of people want to do is live their life, invent shit, learn things, and build their empire based on their knowledge and their experiments, right? But if you make any headway, it's like people start looking and people start listening, and then the wolves come out. And I think I've seen a lot of makers that have dealt with that. And I know that, you mentioned that about the data center, and I think that could be it's definitely a realistic fear, I think. But I don't have any doubt that you won't let that happen to your invention. I think protection of that type of mind spill into technology, I think it's really important. And I hate when you join a company and you have to sign this form that says anything I invent, doesn't matter if it's at work or at home, while I'm employed by you, that becomes your intellectual property. That always rubbed me the wrong way. Like, you're going to rob my thoughts and my actions and my experiments on my own time to benefit your corporation. Like, I think that's
that's the exchange. That's what you agreed to. When you work with them, you sign a contract and you agree to those terms, or you get the fuck out. And that's just is what it is. I don't view the world in terms of ethics. So when you use the word like, and you're going to rob, I don't think of things that way. I just think, hey, you signed the fucking contract. That was the deal. That's what you agreed to. If you don't like it, then fuck off and make your own company. Yeah. Right? Whether you were robbed or not, or whether it's right or wrong, I don't give a fuck. If you don't like it, then get your own shit. I don't deal with things as in that way where I look at stuff and go, oh, this company and they're so unethical, or this company is bad, or Elon Musk is a horrible person, or some stupid shit. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Is what he's doing, is anything he's doing, will that help me? Like, can I replicate some of his strategy to bring myself up? If the answer is yes, sure, I'm going to do it. And my data centers and my projects and everything, I'm not building them to contribute to some kind of maker community or some hacker community. I'm doing it for me, because what I want to do is because what I like to do. I'm not part of any community except the me, myself, and I community. Everything I do is for me. And I would argue that everything everybody does is for them. Everybody's guided by self-interest. There's no such thing as altruism. Have you ever given a poor person $1, like a bum on the street?
Mm.
Okay, well, why did you do it? Why'd you give it to him?
I don't know. I think it's for selfish reasons, more than likely. I think it was because
of course.
If I was in that position, hopefully it'd come back,
Yeah. Well, okay. So did it make you feel good when you did that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, then that's why you did it. And if it didn't make you feel good, you wouldn't do it. So you ultimately did it for yourself. And if it didn't make you feel good, then maybe you would say, I did it because it's the right thing to do. Okay. Now you're conforming to your self-interest of what it is the right thing to do, right? Everybody is guided by self-interest. Even if you love somebody, like you say somebody, I love you. Do you really love them, or do you love the feeling they give you inside your head?
Exactly.
Right? Because it's all in your head. People don't see things this way.
Right.
They don't look at the world the way I do, and it prevents them from excelling in the way I'm excelling, because I operate in reality, not bullshit and fantasy crap.
Tangible
where things are magical. I just see them the way they are. Like good, bad, whether the government is good, bad, I don't give a shit. That's not even the argument. It's just that, hey, the government has a massive amount of power, and if I fuck with them, they're going to smush me into the ground. So I better not fuck with them and just kind of be like, okay, you guys have your fun. I'm going to do my own thing. Like, see ya. That solves the problem for me. And that's how I deal with power. You have to be aware who has power, who doesn't, who has more power than you, who has less power than you. People who have less power than me, I don't look at them and go, oh, cool, let's take advantage of them. I just be on my merry way. Right? But then people who have more power than me, I go, oh, okay, yeah, let's
avoid that shit.
Let's avoid that shit at all costs and figure out a way to operate to where I'm not pissing them off so they don't come and fuck me. Right? Like, why would I go fuck with the government on purpose?
Right.
When it's kind of like if 10 police hovered around your ass, right? And they were fucking with you and shit.
You're not going to win that fight.
No, no matter what you do, because they will accelerate force into the point that you're dead, right? So the way I would deal with that situation is I would be like, okay, cool. What do we need to do here? Because I know that it is not in my favor, right? And that's how I operate at a very self-aware level, to where I'm not picking battles that I can't win. I'm strategically moving and navigating myself through the playing field in a way that benefits me, but also doesn't fuck myself. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. And I seen this happen a lot when I was in the world of street activism. I was just about to ask, how did you deal with that mindset while being involved in street activism? Oh, the mindset I have now?
Yeah.
Well, the mindset I have now is way different from when I was younger and I was involved in street activism. When I was involved in street activism, I was a foolish idealist. You're running around in the streets as a kid thinking, we could change the world by holding up a bunch of signs on a street corner. Or if we yell as loud as we can, the people in power, they'll listen to us. We swear, it's stupid. Or you're involved in some kind of giant march and there's riot police everywhere. And then you somehow think in your head as this idealist young man that you're going to win a battle against them, right? Maybe, possibly. We've seen some of that. We've seen many of those battles won during the COVID-19 pandemic and the riots that occurred. I seen people battling out with the police in the street and they were winning, but you're talking about a massive amount of people. But in the end, what did they win? Everything's back to normal, right? Yeah. So this is just the way I look at things. Like I said, I'm not an idealist. I'm an incredible, logical person. Yeah, a very real person. And I know that I can't control the world, and I can't poke my nose in people's shit who could essentially kill me in the blink of an eye. Right. That'd be dumb, just stupid to do. Why would I do that? And I just want to kind of live my life and be free. That's pretty much my goal, to do whatever the hell I want. And I have an urge to build things and create and make things fantastic. A lot of people are going to be sad to hear that I'm not about this magical idealistic vision of ascending humanity and blah, blah, blah. I see that all the time. Like, let's be real. Most people say that shit because they want to virtue signal or whatever the hell it is. Because they think if they sit there and they look at somebody and go, hey, motherfucker, I'm doing this for me. And it's great. I love it. Right. They think that if they say that, people are going to hate them. But why would you do it if it wasn't for you? Why would you get up in the morning if it wasn't for yourself? Why would you try to excel at anything if it wasn't for you? Right? Exactly. Everything I do is for me. And it just so happens that when I do stuff for me, it trickles to benefit the people around me. And I form relationships of mutual aid, cooperation, and reciprocation. Because that's how humans get things. Human beings are social animals. And if you want your piece of the pie, you may need other people to get that piece of the pie, and you're gonna have to give them your piece of the pie too, or their share of the pie, right? Unless you have so much power that you could just take everybody's pie and shit on them, which is what you're saying. Yeah, which is what you're saying. Which is what you're saying. You're sick of, and I'm saying whether you're sick of it or not, it's always gonna happen. Yeah, it's never gonna end. So just deal with it in a way to where you either remove yourself from it and do your own thing with your group. That's pretty much what's realistic to me, right? And that's it. We're all gonna die, so fuck it. Like just stop worrying so much and being so serious, and just fucking do what you want to do.
Exactly.
That's it. Right?
I think that just listening to you and interacting with you, it's made me look at a few things differently. I think that your point of view is spot on. Like, I haven't heard somebody speak the truth like that in a very long time, and I think that sometimes I get wrapped up in what's going on in everybody else's world instead of focusing more on achieving for myself. And I think you're absolutely right with that. I'd like to spend more time, sit down and talk to you about this stuff, because I think you're onto something, and it's something I haven't heard. I grew up in the whole hacktivist environment, and, trying to make waves and trying to get what we wanted through that. Like you said, it's never going to end. Like, I make a lot of waves, but I don't try to make waves. I make waves because of who I am, because I don't apologize for how I think. I say shit that people, it's real. It's real.
Yeah. I'm just a real person, man. Like, I'm not running around being like, what can I say tomorrow to make fucking waves? I'm just here and I say it, and it is what it is. And I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
And if people don't like it,
don't have to listen.
Kick rocks. Goodbye. Like, you don't have to listen to me. You don't have to like me. I don't care. Get in line with the rest of the people who are waiting for me to give a fuck, because I won't ever. Right? Like, I don't care. And that's the approach I take to things. And I think a lot of, but there's a price to pay for that, man.
Right.
Living the way that I live is that there's going to be a lot of people who are uncomfortable with a very straightforward individual who communicates on a very realistic level and doesn't say things to try to make you like them. They say things that are real, right? But it's the price to pay is that you're going to get rejected by a lot of people because people don't want to hear what they should hear. They want to hear what makes them feel good inside, right?
What they're used to hearing.
Yeah, what they're used to hearing, right? That you're perfect or whatever and shit and that. I don't look in the mirror and say I'm perfect every day. I look in the mirror and say, shit, man, there's so many things you could do to make yourself a better person. Why are you doing this? Why are you drinking too much coffee? You know, that's not good for you. Like, I criticize myself to an insane level. You know, I don't walk around thinking I'm some kind of fucking god or some shit. And people need to hear that. Like, and I'm surrounded by people, my closest friends, who will look me in the face and say, Zach, you know what, the shit you're doing, man, it's robbing you of your efficiency. Like, you need to stop this shit. Like, I have friends that are willing to tell me the hard truths to my face. And those are the people that you should keep around you, right? Not individuals that make you feel good all the time. Because success and growth isn't comfortable. It requires you to look in the mirror and beat yourself up a little bit. Yeah. Right?
I think everybody needs to.
What'd you say?
I think everybody needs that.
No, they do. And if there's one thing that people need to understand is that I'm not a nice guy, right? If I'm being nice, it's because I'm being nice to you. But I wouldn't consider myself a nice guy because I'm not running around saying and doing things with the thought, how can I make this person feel good? I say and do things as they are, and if people don't want to hear them, well, they're at a loss. Because the things I have to say to people are things that if they're held onto and grabbed onto, they could bring themselves to a level of efficiency that they would not think before was possible. And that's essentially what I've done to myself. I've thrown myself down the deepest, darkest hole, the endless pit of nothingness. And from that, I realized that nothing matters. And the world is what I make it. And it's up to me and nobody else. And that's where all my energy comes from.
Yeah.
And then plus, of course, I'm really pissed off, like you, about how things are unfair. But I got over that a long time ago, man. This is where I'm at now, you know?
Yeah, I think once people stop battling themselves as well, and go by, what is going to make me a better person, what's going to make me more efficient, I think the world becomes a lot clearer. I think another problem too, like in our industry alone, is if you don't tote the same line as the rest of the industry, they look at you as an outsider. And even with my podcast, like there's people who hate my podcast and what I had to say, and there's people who like it. But what I learned very early on, when I really cared about what they thought, I learned that it's not about them. It's about me enjoying what I'm doing, and I don't give a fuck what they think about what I have to say. If they find
you could have been mediocre, you could have been ordinary, right? And then internally you'd be suffering because you weren't exemplifying your true self to the world. Right. And the price to pay for that is criticism. Yep. If you're going to make waves, you're going to get criticized, man. It's just part of it, right? If you want to be great, you're going to get criticized. There's going to be people that are going to think you're crazy. I'm sure there's people that think I'm fucking crazy. And when they ask me if I am, I look at them and I say, yeah, I am. Don't fuck with me. Leave me alone. Right? Right? Who cares? Who cares? Whatever. Let them think what they want. Because at the end of the day, the way I approach life and my philosophy is working for me. And it's getting me everything I fucking want. And what is their way that they're preaching to me getting for them? Fucking nothing. Yeah, except a bunch of pain and suffering and complaints and bullshit that they deal with every day because they refuse to make the fucking change. Yep. Okay? And that's what it is. I don't give a shit about whether you're depressed or not. I don't care about your mental state. I don't care about your breakup or where the fuck it is, or the fact that you were born without the tools or without this and that. It doesn't matter.
No.
Because it's still up to you, man. Like, that's it. It's do or die. That's the situation we live in. I'm not supporting that. I'm just saying that's what it is.
Right.
I didn't make it that way.
No.
And that's what you got to deal with. And if you don't see it as that way, and you don't see that you're in a society where you're competing with 1 million people for the same fucking resources, then you're going to lose. You're going to get swallowed up and you're going to get stabbed in the back. And you're going to get your throat slit by other people who are competing around you. Right? So you have to just become internally and externally hard as fuck and skilled as hell and bring yourself to the roof. Just forget about what everybody else is doing, right? So and living off grid means that you can take care of yourself, and if you lose your job or whatever, or you're still good.
Yeah.
Right? And I found that through hustling and contracting and by doing other things in cybersecurity, I can make more money than a year than most people at the tip of their career in cybersecurity.
And not have to spend half of it too.
Huh?
And not have to spend half of it too.
Yes, exactly. And not have to spend half of it too. Yeah. And not have to be a slave to some corporation 24 hours a day to make $200,000 a year. You can easily make $200,000 a year by flipping some crack houses. Right? If you learn how to do drywall, do electric, do plumbing, and all the shit you need to do, but people don't want to learn that, right? So it's all up to you, man.
Most people want to be spoon-fed everything too, and
they do.
Yeah,
they do. And I don't feed people shit. I throw it at them, and I say, "Here, catch. Oh, the ball's too heavy. I guess you should get more stronger and skilled." Oh man, what a shame! I told you. Oh no, please stop. Oh. Okay, well, I guess you don't got what it takes then. I mean, a lot of people come to my company like, what kind of positions do you have in your company? When can I start? I go, no, it doesn't work like that. You have to prove that you're worthy of fucking working here. If you don't have the skills, then you can't roll with us. Right? Because if people are getting dropped into contracts and shit, and that's another thing about cybersecurity, is that there is no entry-level cybersecurity, right? These companies are relying on you to protect millions of dollars, billions of dollars in assets. You think that they're going to send an entry-level dude that doesn't know shit in there? Are you kidding me? Another thing that people don't realize is, why would it make sense for any company to spend $20,000 on training you before you could earn them a fucking dollar? They don't have time for that shit. This is how it works. Why are recruiters ghosting you? Recruiters are ghosting you is because you don't have skills worth a shit. That's why they're ghosting you. Because recruiters are headhunters, aka headhunters who make money off your head. If your head isn't worth shit, they're going to ghost you because they're going to people that are worth more money than you are. Right? They're buying and selling people. That's what they do. That's what recruiters do. Oh, the recruiter hurt my feelings. They shouldn't do that. Shut up. The recruiter is trying to make money. Are you serious? Are you delusional? These businesses are trying to make money, and you want them to waste all their money on training you? You know, that's great. Maybe it should be that way. Maybe that would be... It doesn't matter what you think it should be. It's what it is and approaching it as it fucking is. And that's a fucking problem that people have. Like, it just... Like people, I feel like they just need a shit smacked out of them. Like, wake up, dude. Get out of the delusion. Like, doesn't matter what you think it should be. Here's what it is. Fucking deal with it or get fucked. That's your choice. And that's it. People, when people listen to this, I hope they wake the fuck up. Because if they don't, then they're going to find themselves down the line, 80 years old, wondering, where the fuck did my life go? Right? That's not going to be me. That ain't going to be me. That's for fucking sure.
I'm pretty sure about that. And
no, it's not.
Just from the things you said, like I looked at things that I thought were important, and the way I looked at business and life in general. Just listening to you talk, I'm like, that makes a lot of fucking sense. Like, maybe I should change the way I do things. And I hope that's what this does. I hope when this gets published that people listen to it and go, maybe I ought to see things from that point of view. Not be so fucking closed-minded.
Yeah, sure. It's not even about being closed-minded. It's just about being realistic. It's like, okay, cool. I don't like capitalism. A lot of people don't like capitalism. But guess what? Doesn't fucking matter because you're in it. And unless you do it, you get fucked.
Yep.
Have fun working at McDonald's the rest of your life. Don't want to learn how to create wealth. Don't want to learn how capitalism works. Have fun getting fucked and being poor forever. It's just is what it is. I don't look at things and be like, oh, that's bad. I don't want to engage in it. Let's suffer and be poor the rest of my fucking life because I didn't want to learn how to trade stocks or learn how to do real estate because real estate is unethical. It's like, yeah, great. Wonderful. Right? I don't want to live in a fucking trailer the rest of my life. That was my attitude. When that was my life. Like, whatever. Like, what do you want me to do? Refrain from participating in society that I have to? And these are the conditions. These are the conditions that you're in. Stop with the self-righteous.
The world owes me something. Right. Yeah. The world owes me something idea.
Yeah. The world doesn't owe you shit. Nobody owes you fucking anything.
No.
That's not me saying that you shouldn't be kind to people who need your help.
Right.
I'm all for that. I'm just saying that in reality, like, nobody needs to help you and the world isn't going to somehow come and save you. You're responsible for you.
Yeah.
Okay? That's what self-sufficiency, autonomy, freedom is. Responsibility for oneself. Right? And being responsible for oneself is a huge responsibility, especially when you grow up thinking that you live in a society that is responsible and caretaking of its members. Sure, it is.
It's going to do the right thing for everybody. Everybody thinks that. Like, the world owes them something. They're going to take care of you. There's government assistance that will make sure that you have what you need. They don't give a shit. Like, you've got to be responsible for yourself. And my grandfather told me one time, and it really made an impact on me, is we were at my great-grandma's funeral. And he said, death is a part of life. And he said, you come in this world alone, and you go out of this world alone.
Yeah, I never heard of anybody I never heard of a two-person coffin.
Right.
I mean, if there is one, you're still going out dead anyway without them. Like, so I think that people are unwilling to think about this shit.
Right.
Like, you are going to fucking die. You're going to die. You're going to die. Hello, you're going to fucking die. And I've seen a lot of people die.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are dead. Most of the people in my family are fucking dead. And the only thing I've seen on their faces is the face of regret for all the shit that they didn't fucking do.
Right.
Because they spent their whole lives being slaves to other fucking people and their wants and their needs and what other people in society think they should fucking do. Right. And they never lived out their lives as their true self and did what they want. Right? And that's it, dude. You know, that's all there is to say. Yeah. Hate to burst people's bubble, but I don't give a shit. Maybe you need your bubble burst. Right?
Exactly.
And I would encourage people not to, like, how should I say, like, group me into some kind of political something or wherever the fuck it is. Right. Because I see that as a social construct too. Right. The only thing that's real to me is me, my individual self, this reality.
And survival.
Yeah, and when I'm trying to achieve a level above survival, so I can live the experience. I don't want to just survive. I want to experience. Right? That's why I want to do all this shit. I want to escape the madness.
I totally get it, man. And I have to tell you, thank you for sharing your philosophy on life.
Yeah, sure.
I think if anybody looks at it and really pays attention and does some like self-checking, I think that they'll find the same thing that I'm finding. So I can do things differently. And I think that how I thought I was so individual and how I thought I was so self-sufficient really was not the case. And I think looking at it from your point of view and some of the things I've taken from the conversation, I think there's a lot of work that I could do. And I hope everybody looks at it that way. I hope everybody gets the idea that, hey, this is real. This is not sugar-coated bullshit. This is the way things should be. This is the way you should look at life. But yeah, I totally appreciate it, man. I would love to spend time with you, and I hope that you're documenting this whole process that you've gone through in your life, because I think it'd be like super valuable for other people as well. Like I know you do it for your own reasons, but I'm just fascinated just hearing you talk and listen to the way that your mind works. I find it completely fascinating. And it's been an honor.
I don't think anybody really cares, man. Honestly.
Yeah.
Like, who gives a fuck what I'm doing? Except me, really. There's nobody that really gives a fuck about you more than you.
Yeah.
And that's for everybody out there. No one's going to ever care about you more than you do.
Sure.
Once you realize that, that's when things really change. And things become dire. It's do or die. You're running out of fucking time.
Yep.
Every day you're dying. Do something with your life. Get up out of bed. Stop watching Netflix. Stop looking at Instagram. Stop wasting your time in stupid, petty drama bullshit. And put your nose in the dirt and bring yourself where you want to go. And that's it. That's all. Awesome. That's all, man. I guess that's my message. Cool. People can take it or leave it, and I don't give a shit if they do or not, because it ain't my problem. It's up to them.
I know I personally appreciate it, and I'd love to talk sometime soon off the podcast and just kind of like pick the brain for some stuff. But with that, man, I'm going to wrap up the show. And
all right,
I really appreciate you being on, and I hope things go well with the data center, and you've got my support if you ever need it. So.
Yep.
All right, man.
All right. Peace out.
I'll see you next time, man.
All right. Yeah.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
All right, we're back, everybody. Next up, we've got DevOps Unbound. This is a replay of episode number 23, which is called Bringing Chaos to DevOps. And in this one, Mitch Ashley, the host, is joined by Tammy Buteau of StatType and Paul Bruce of Tricentis. And they're going to be talking about the principles and best practices of chaos engineering and how to effectively implement chaos testing to ensure resiliency. Definitely a must listen to conversation if your organization is considering chaos engineering or already doing it and they want to learn more about it. Definitely want to check this one out. So let's roll it now.
Well, welcome to another episode of DevOps Unbound. We're talking about chaos engineering, very hot topic, and we've got a couple of experts here on our panel today. Let me first start by reminding you that DevOps Unbound is a twice monthly recorded on Techstrong TV. You can check us out and watch us there. Past episodes are also available on DevOpsUnbound.com. And we also do a live roundtable once a month in a webinar format, but it's similar to this, but the audience can participate with us in a very engaging way. So we love that you're here either on a pre-record or with us live on roundtable events. And of course, we'd love to thank our wonderful sponsors from Tricentis. They are sponsors of this series and been really great. Chantel and Jody have been really great to work with in planning some of the topics and guests and things that we do. So appreciate Tricentis being a good partner. Well, let's get to our topic. We're going to talk about chaos engineering. Before I do a little bit of an intro to that, let's have our two panelists intro themselves. Tammy, would you start? Tell us a little bit about you and who you work for, what kind of work that you do.
Sure thing. Thanks, Mitch. Hi, everyone. My name's Tammy Bryant-Buteau, and I work at Gremlin. I'm a principal site reliability engineer. I've been at Gremlin for 4 years. I get to do a lot of chaos engineering. So Gremlin is actually a chaos engineering platform. I do a lot of work of Gremlin on Gremlin. And actually, really interestingly, over the last few years, I've got to see how so many different companies practice chaos engineering because they're our customers. So like JPMC, Target, Walmart, so many more from all over the world. And yeah, bring a lot of interesting experiences along with me everywhere I go, which is fun. And before this, I worked at Dropbox as a site reliability engineering manager. And I was also at DigitalOcean and the National Australia Bank. So been working in the reliability space for 12 years now.
Fantastic. Amazing experience. So we appreciate you being here to share it with us. How about you, Paul?
So again, my name is Paul. I work with Tricentis in incubation and in customer engineering, especially with NeoLoad, the load testing product that they have, the platform there. So yes, there are a lot of names that we actually share between Gremlin and Tricentis. And just in the Fortune 1000, it's very hard to not be bumping elbows, especially around communities of practice. So, other communities of practice that I tend to be part of are my local Boston DevOps and DevOps Days. I organize the DevOps Days Boston event. I also run some of my own events around observability and security. Just kind of as sort of sandbox to give new people space to do that in a vendor agnostic way. So aside from really appreciating some of these kind of conversations, it's not surprising that we find ourselves not so much stepping on each other's toes, but finding ourselves in the same rooms, right? Talking with similar people because they have particular problems and challenges, and they're looking at, how do we move from a traditional model to a more modern model? What's good about certain approaches and technologies and what's bad about them, and how do we need to right fit this stuff? So I get to speak with a lot of our, especially Fortune 100 customers who are in the place where from a maturity perspective, they have the building blocks of all the other things that are good enough to get to the point where they're actually able to start talking about chaos, or maybe resiliency is a little bit more corporately convenient to say it.
In some circles, that's a little more palatable, right?
Yeah.
Well, and also folks may notice my co-host, Alan Schimmel, who's also CEO of Techstrong Group, is absent today. He's on hiatus. Well, he's on special assignment. He's at another venue doing some other things. So he'll be back with us on our next episode, of course. So chaos engineering, I know it never happens, but sometimes we throw about these terms, people adopt them, people make them their own, and it turns into something it's not, co-opt them. And oftentimes if you're approaching this as a new topic, or something you're looking to learn about, is like, well, what is it? And I know you all have been doing this for a number of years. Maybe could we give folks a working definition of chaos engineering? Tammy, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The one that I like to use is thoughtful, planned experiments designed to reveal improvements in our systems. So, and when you think about it like that, this helps you understand how it's changed over the last 10 years. Chaos Monkey was created 10 years ago now, and that was more about like randomly shutting down EC2 instances, like very narrow, small view of chaos engineering. It's grown so much over the last 10 years. So I like that thoughtful, planned experiments where we're looking to make improvements.
Yeah, I can't do much better on that, other than to add to at the end of that statement was systems. And systems, as a DevOps nerd, right? Systems are the multi-body problem, which is the people, process, and technology. So, we oftentimes think that chaos engineering is all about our systems and the resiliency of our systems, but it has a lot to do as well with proactively understanding how to prevent, or how to flesh out a plan. This idea that you had in your mind about how you would respond to certain things. Well, let's actually try that. And maybe we don't just try that straight up in prod right off the bat. So,
it's interesting. It's funny that you mentioned 10 years ago, Chaos Monkey. Seems like it hasn't been that long. Wow. But that sort of started the conversation and us thinking about it. It's this chaotic, send something out there that's going to randomly try to break things before they break and find where those flaws are. And while that's an element of it, your definition, Tammy, also puts more of an SRE engineering mindset to this too, right? We need to be able to measure and find out where we have the flaws, because just because something breaks doesn't mean that's where the break fix needs to happen. I'm curious, and also, why does this overlap so much with SRE? You could argue it overlaps or intersects, works closely with observability, some of the testing work that you do. There's a lot of things that kind of live in this space together. How would you make sense of that? How do you fit that together for people? Paul, why don't you go?
Well, I think some sense of, in the old days, right? Mm-hmm. It used to be there were different people for different reasons, and there was a process, and it took a long time. And in many ways, that was because there were a lot of things that are kind of batching up. 15 years ago, continuous motions were not the primary default. And so there were large, big batches. Now we're in a lot of small, and especially with distributed systems, right? Especially with distributed architecture, fantastic. We solved for a problem, which is how do we be able to update these things independently? But as it turns out, they're not really independent, especially when you ship them up to a cloud. Now, all of a sudden, you introduce network latencies that you didn't expect. When you change architectures from sort of synchronous to asynchronous, right? That really changed the equation of what you need to ask. So what we find is that it's not good enough to be in a silo. It's not good enough to have siloed knowledge in the organization. It's not just enough to, let's say, run a performance test and barf somebody a report that has nothing to do with what was the impact to the server's services, right? And also, even on a perfect day, if that happens, we're still still only testing a certain amount of the distributed happy path, as I would call it. Where resiliency engineering comes into play is when we start to say there needs to be a way to not inject faults, but to Tammy's point, to be able to hypothesize what happens if and when. And so, in a strict performance and reliability engineering, like when I go and engage customers and we have these discovery conversations that exposes what's their practices today and where they want to move, one of the things that I find oftentimes not in their purview is the architectural diagrams. Now, architectural diagrams start somewhere and then, stale. And so you have to kind of update those with what's the reality of the system a year after you shipped it, or so on and so forth. But even just being able to draw the boxes on the whiteboard and say, this is the ideal way that the thing is set up, right? You can get these Visio diagrams or these, SketchUp diagrams or whatever from certain people. Well, that's step one. Step two is to actually look at that diagram and go, where are the most likely bottlenecks? Where are the most likely points of failure? Or where is the least amount of resilience? And you can start, you need to get information on the table, right? Before you can make any kind of informed hypothesis. Even before, I mean, there's things that resiliency and chaos engineering are great for. And then there's a lot of things that it's not. Same thing with where I come from, the old load testing background, right? There are some things that it's great for and some things that it's not. But taking a sense of give the information up front to kind of say, what is the holistic picture? To answer your question, Mitch, I think the reason why we're blending and why this sort of overlaps with SREs is because in the old siloed model, nobody cared about the big picture. Maybe except for the architecture person, or worse, maybe the operations people that are dealing with fires in production, then trying to retroactively find time with the product teams, only to find that they don't have time because they're busy shipping new features and have no error budgets, no time for tech debt, architectural debt and stuff like that. So it becomes a big cluster. When you have that sort of those kind of mentalities in. And I kind of think SREs is almost like mini product, like product managers is one way to say it, but that's got a specific word. Managing directors, right? Of how this thing is actually going to run really well.
Pause that for a second, because I'm going to jump into SRE. And Tammy, I want you to get a chance, because you've said a lot there, Paul, and we want to unpack some of this. So jump in, Tammy.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. So I'm a CNCF ambassador. And one of the really interesting things is if you look at the CNCF landscape, it's really cool. You can see all of the cloud native technologies on there. Chaos engineering right now fits under observability and analysis. And to me, what I would love to see in the future is actually that there's a reliability section where we would have tools that are like chaos engineering, but also incident management, alerting. I do feel like these actually fit better under the reliability banner, but that doesn't exist yet. It's actually what we're talking about is very much future, forward thinking types of works. It's actually quite new. Even though Chaos Monkey was created 10 years ago, chaos engineering has only really started to become much more popular over the last, I would say, 2 years. And, when I was talking to people 4 years ago, they didn't even have monitoring and alerting observability tools that they were using regularly or that they trusted worked. Now that's changed 4 years from then. So that's my thoughts there of where chaos engineering fits in terms of SREs, how come SREs practice chaos engineering or are fans of it? For me, the reason I do it, and I've done it for many years now, is because for me, it was the fastest way to be able to make an improvement. And that's what you're always trying to do as an SRE, because you're so busy, with all of the other work that you have to do. You're on call. Maybe you're getting paged a lot when you first join a team. You're helping give advice to teams about what best practices are for how to set up everything that they're doing. You're doing automation work. So whenever you can find a way to make an improvement, to move the needle that you can actually measure and show everyone, hey, we did this failure injection work, we ran all these experiments. And, one of my big wins was I got a 10x reduction in incidents within 3 months because of practicing chaos engineering, identifying what we needed to fix, and then just getting those things fixed. Even if it's a temporary fix until we can do the permanent fix, at least we're not getting paged constantly. So that's why I think SREs love chaos engineering. But then the other thing I would mention is that over the years, it's kind of changed who is practicing chaos engineering. So I'd say 4 years ago, it was definitely pretty much all SREs that I talked to that were doing chaos engineering. And they either were doing it as part of their role within the SRE team, or they'd actually created another team called the Chaos Engineering team. And it was SREs doing chaos engineering as a full-time job. And that's all they did. And now, though, what I see is we still have lots of SREs doing chaos engineering even more than before. There's those dedicated chaos engineering teams, but there's also QA teams that are practicing chaos engineering. That's really popular now, and performance engineering teams. And I'm actually seeing product managers say, we want to do chaos engineering for our products that we're launching. So yeah, it's like expanded, which is exciting.
It really is interesting. And it's a topic that's been coming up, I don't know, the last couple of months, because observability is so much in front of everybody. Chaos engineering, all these SRE, all these topics is, I was thinking about Chaos Monkey, and you're mentioning that. That was really just a representation of the world we're now living in, and not Chaos Monkey itself, but everything is changing all the time. And you can't do manual things. It can't be manual break fix all the time anymore, because the environment's changed by the time you might go to break fix it, right? And so using automated tools and engineering approaches both elevates the operational role to be more than, up, down kind of monitoring kind of things, and really getting into how do we help improve the reliability of our systems. Do you think are organizations really adopting more of a seriousness around operations and what this means because of observability and chaos engineering? Is that really happening out there in the real world, as opposed to here in video land where we like to talk about this stuff?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the shared customers that Gremlin and Tricentis have, I shouldn't probably name them, but they're well in the Fortune 50, and they are in the large healthcare and insurance provisioning vertical. And their team of performance and reliability people have been around. They know how to use their tools. They push forward in terms of how do we automate some of this stuff. There's a lot of appetite and interest of, the 500 plus teams of product teams that they actually serve, to move away from this sort of center of excellence, attitude, or, the pool of knowledge only over here, to start building those into automated processes. So I was working with them about 4 months ago to make sure that there are proper sanity checks in terms of performance before they actually move on to a big test? Okay, well, a big test, but also moving on in those big tests and done in a frequent basis is the Gremlin, the chaos injection that allows them to actually prove that just because a couple of servers go down, and this is interesting, it's not just about scale. It's not just about the infrastructure, right? Maybe at the beginning, Chaos Monkey and those tools were all about just testing and proving that infrastructure could come back reliably. But what they actually do, and a lot of our customers actually do this with Neoload, is not just it's not just about putting pressure on your systems. It's about handling these long-running tasks, especially in insurance and healthcare. There are claims processing that takes upwards of minutes to go through all these like back asynchronous queues and stuff like that, from system to system. And what they need to do is they need to push that workload into the system, maybe even use a tool to generate data, push the workload into the system, monitor the little points of how the data is going through the system, and then actually at the end verify that regardless of what happened, because Gremlin was engaged to take some nodes or some servers down, that 100% of the claims that were supposed to go through the system are actually through the system. I would consider that more like data regression, right? But it is a reliability factor and a resiliency factor of your system to be able to say, there is a standard set of things that we provide as a community of practice, not a center of excellence, a community of enablement and practice. And we've already built patterns in pipelines that help you take advantage of some of that self-service without having to know a ton about it. There is a standard set of things that we do in the default chaos injections. There's a standard set of things we do to put pressure on the system or to help you push all your data through the system and verify it afterwards. And those two things have to go hand in hand. Mitch, I think to your point, doing things manually, right? There's no such thing as a useful chaos experiment where you're just opening the browser and trying it as one person. You need statistical significance, whether you do that in production. And potentially, there's issues there that I'd actually want to ask Tammy about a little bit later. Or whether you're doing this in a pre-prod environment, it's still teaching you things. It's still helping you build that, okay, we didn't know about that. Let's fix the architecture diagram. Okay, we didn't know that it's going to engage those alerting systems. Oops, and now our storage mechanisms, the people on our storage team are freaking out, and they didn't even know why they were freaking out until we started talking with them. That has to be planned, and you have to have emotional and situational intelligence about your organization, especially if it's a big organization, before you start doing these things.
It's a great question, which I was going to ask also is, do we do this in production? Is that where the real benefit comes from? Do we do this in test and in sandboxed environments? What do we learn differently from both? I totally get we don't want the security group freaking out when it looks like something's been compromised because we found some buffer control overflow issue. But we do need to know that production is resilient too. I mean, Tammy, where does this belong? What do you do in each of those environments?
Yeah, I always like to say practicing chaos engineering in production, it's a journey. It's not something that people do on day one ever. And, the way to get there successfully is that you do start in lower level environments. My recommendation actually, I love Paul's term community of practice. What I like to do is tell everyone, learn how to do chaos engineering first in a demo environment, not even actually your applications with your data. Just have a demo application. You can get a great one off GitHub called Bank of Anthos that Google created, and it's an internet banking application. That's an awesome one. We can share the link to that and just inject some failure there because it runs on Kubernetes. You can learn more about how Kubernetes works, doesn't work in different situations. And Gremlin has a lot of different attack types. So there's networking related attacks, resource attacks, state attacks. Those are the categories. For networking, it might be let's inject packet loss, let's increase latency, resources, disk IO, memory, CPU. So there's a lot of different things you can do. And often it's also about planning the experiment, combining different types of attacks for different amounts of times. One of my favorite attacks is called a black hole, where you make a service disappear and then you see what happens to its dependencies. And like Paul said as well, it's not just about the service went away, did it come back? It's also how does that look to the user when a user's logged into internet banking and suddenly the balance reader isn't working? Can they send deposits? Can they make payments? Do they see error messages? What actually is their experience? And I think really great SREs, they do think about the user experience. You're really focused on the customer. And that's an amazing skill, because I've been on tons of incidents where we were getting so many support tickets from customers saying my data is not there, my data's disappeared. And wasn't that, it was the thumbnail preview service wasn't working. So that's why thinking through how does this impact the user is so important. So I always recommend thinking about it from that perspective. And I generally say to get to production, it takes companies several years. Most companies, I'd say it takes them about 2 to 3 years to start practicing chaos engineering in production. And I think that's totally fine. That makes a lot of sense. And it's good to have that as a big milestone date. We did our first ever chaos engineering in production. This is what we learned. We improved our mean time to recovery by this much. So yeah, I've got lots of cool customers that I've seen do that. And it's really exciting to celebrate it as well. It's not easy to do. It's a challenge. Yeah.
Of a crawl, walk, run, to use that familiar analogy, but it makes a lot of sense. What do you see? Is there a kind of a typical stages of evolution that people go through? I know they're not probably formally named, but what does that journey look like? So if somebody is in the middle of it, they kind of know where they are, what might be next, or if they're starting saying, I have no idea what this might look like. Can I get at least some clue of where I'm headed with this? Either one of you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what Paul mentioned there as well, about how he's working with a customer that's using Tricentis and Gremlin, that story is really common. I would say that folks start a community practice, they help everyone learn how do I do chaos engineering, then they try and think through what experiments do we want to do here within our organization, how do we automate that? And when you think about automation of chaos engineering, there are different ways to do that. most common way is actually integrating it into your CI/CD pipelines. So we see a lot of people doing that. Like, for example, with Jenkins. Jenkins is very widely used by a lot of big enterprises. And that way you can just run all of your suite of chaos engineering experiments. People sometimes call it a reliability gauntlet, which I like that term. I think it's pretty cool. That makes it so fun. And it's like, you got to pass the reliability gauntlet. Did you do it or not? And then they report back on the results in an automated way. So when you come in, the next morning or that afternoon, you can see, I need to fix these issues because it didn't pass and I'm not able to get to production until I pass all of these experiments. And then the other way you can do it is by scheduling game days to run, but in an automated way. So game days is another great topic. I really love them. Once you run a game day once, you can then automate it and you can say, like, let's do the DNS game day, the DNS failover game day every Wednesday. It's just going to happen. And if something goes wrong, then, that's great. We'll go and try and fix those issues. But that's the journey that I see. Definitely like start small, gradually expand your blast radius of teams and experiments and the impact that you're working on. Like I never see anyone be like, let's start really big and then go to smaller.
Throw caution to the wind. Let's go for the whole enchilada here. Let's bring it all down.
That has a lot to do too with like the amount of antibodies for failure and risk and security and all the things that are in these larger companies. I only focus on larger companies in this conversation because they oftentimes have problems at scale. They have problems of systems at scale, legacy code as opposed to just greenfield unicorn sneezing rainbows kind of stuff. They also have a lot of compliance and regulation that they have to deal with. And these things I don't consider them as bogging down. I consider them as grown-up problems. You know what I mean? We can argue about the finer points of, what specific PCI compliance thing you don't agree with, but ultimately, like, this is business and there's reasons for Sarbanes-Oxley and stuff like that. So when you have to live in that world, yet you have these potential new technologies or approaches, it's really important not just to, Mitch, you mentioned before we started that it was like, we don't want this to just be a big agreement fest, but I'm having a hard time disagreeing with anything Tammy says. And so if there's any kind of way to sort of challenge, Tammy, what you just said, not the specific points of it, but to take it forward and say, okay, well, the DNS game day, right? Anytime you want to do something, you might get to a point where something is scalable in a community of practice. That's a great point, but that doesn't make sure it happens on a regular basis. There have to be people, like I'm saying, an SRE mindset that's almost like a managing director of this particular, and you have your portfolio of projects. One of those projects is being the lead on making sure this thing is open, available, good space, safe space, and it happens, right? Same thing with book clubs, same thing with, other community of practice enablement sessions. That takes effort. And so my question or my challenge to all of us is try to figure out how do we make sure that we empower people to sell that up, right? What are a couple of easy takeaways that can be like, not only do we wordsmith and move away from this sort of attack, and like these are faults and we're going to definitely do it in production. How do we move the language to an appropriate way? I think things are happening there, which is good, but also how do we arm and empower people who see the value from a technical perspective, but don't necessarily know how to sell that throughout the organization? What would you say to that, Tammy?
Yeah. So actually, I get asked this a lot from folks. How do I learn chaos engineering and how do I explain it to others? And so what I did, because I wanted to make that very scalable, like how I would help people learn that. So I created a certificate, actually. So if you go to gremlin.com/certification, you can take a free certificate and it only takes 30 minutes, but that's going to really give you all of the information for like, how do I really get buy-in from my leadership team, from my greater org to be able to start practicing chaos engineering so everyone understands like what's the ROI, but also to make it inspiring and exciting and to help you learn how to do it technically. Like that's a really good certificate. And then if you do well on that, you pass. There's also the second level, which is the professional level. That's definitely a lot harder. And you're going to have to be someone who's practicing chaos engineering regularly to be able to pass that one. But I would say, like, I'd recommend that, you go and get certified because that will help you understand how to communicate chaos engineering and all of the benefits to other people. The other thing I did too, which I can share a link for, is I made a demo Confluence wiki site, actually. So many people were like showing me these chaos engineering wikis they'd made. And I was like, these are really cool. Like, I'm just going to collect all the best parts and put it into this one wiki. And then I actually made it public. So anyone across the world can go and look at this like public chaos engineering wiki.
Love it.
So yeah. And it's got a maturity model and everything. So that sort of stuff is pretty cool. And we're continuously expanding on what we add into this wiki. So it's like an open source wiki for everybody.
So that's one of the true signs of an SRE mindset. Right? It's not just do the work and there's no superhero capes, right? That the anti-pattern superhero. No, it's sharing and exploring an area together and kind of helping people, like pushing people forward without necessarily, that's super cool. One thing I remember too is I do a similar thing with performance and reliability testing and engineering. And it often comes up is, how do you go from like 0 to something, or how do you go from like 5 miles an hour to like 30 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour? And it is a journey, right? And it takes time. But one of the paradigms that I use, I go back to Kent Beck. He has this notion of the 3X model: explore, expand, extract, which has more to do with, finding good ideas and capitalizing on them and being the leader in X and whatnot. And the explore, expand, extract is, in the explore phase, you're digging a lot of little holes to find where the gold is. And it's the same thing when you're starting out trying to build communities of practice. The emotional intelligence is number one, that you have to start small and find where the actual appropriate is, not something that is cool to you, but something that's really cool to multiple people in your organization, right? At Tricentis, as part of incubation engineering, I'm doing a lot of that. And what I find is to have that idea seeded through many people in the organization and get their feedback, but also if it ends up actually being a great idea, to be able to actually now have, sort of preemptive champions for that thing, because they've started to know and aware of that. That's one step in the explore phase. Expand is now you have something scalable. Now, what do we have to do to put in place from a program thinking perspective to make sure that there's at least a certain amount of time where this is executed predictably for people, executed effectively for looking back and saying, how did this program work? And are we capturing the right ROI metrics? And is it really working or is it not? Does it need adjustment? And then the extract phase is mostly like, we've got our stuff together. We know how this works, and it can expand to the entire, that 500 teams kind of situation that I was talking about. That takes a little time. But one last part about that paradigm is, in my incubation work, right, I give people time box amount of time. If an engineer comes to me with a good idea, right, maybe it's chaos, right? They want to go chaos testing, something like that, right? Fine. Let's time box that so that it's not like this is going to last forever. Good project management 101, right? Let's also, if you're a great engineer, but you don't know how to sell this upwards and get alignment and agreement with your leadership or with our leadership internally or with somebody else or with the customer, I can put my business analyst hat on and be your business analyst for hire, for rent for a little time and work together. But the point there is that at the same time you're evolving the actual technical elements of the thing, you always have to be situationally and organizationally aware of how to sell that, how to grow that out, and figure out how to report that in such a way where people go, yeah, sure, carry on, right? This looks good, as opposed to, what are you doing? No, I'm sorry, So that part of it is just you've got to pair both sides of this. There's a social and business story. There's a technical side story. And I haven't yet found one single person that can always do that in the 45, 60-hour work weeks that we have. You usually have to pair with somebody else to bring that forward. So let me, since we have a good amount of agreement, I'll play the counterpoint here. Let me present the curmudgeon, skeptical manager you've got to convince to do this. Not that I've ever been that person, of course not. But, that's a whole nother conversation.
you can imagine going, let me go to my boss and say, we need to practice chaos engineering. And say, well, yeah, we need to go play on the highway too. Is there sort of how do you, if you've got skeptics, and I imagine there's a few people out in the audience who've got a tough road to hoe to kind of get to that point where it really is embraced, do you go at this as a reliability load testing problem we want to start to work on? How do you do that without kind of being sneaky about it, or do you have to be sneaky about it?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of thoughts on this because I've definitely been able to help folks do it, and I've done it myself. So usually, like, what I like to do is like talk about people who've already done this and had great success. So often, like, before I had done it myself and I wanted to convince other people, I would just say things like, hey, the National Australia Bank that I worked at, they were actually the first bank in the whole world to practice chaos engineering. And here's an article that they actually wrote up that was released. It's in the news. It was like a journalist interviewed them about it. They shared all of their wins that they had from doing it. This is a long time ago in 2012. So being able to share something like that, then people go, oh, wow, a bank is doing this. And if banks are doing it, then, I feel like everyone else should do it because they're always the ones that are more cautious than anybody else. And they have all these compliance requirements and regulation requirements. But the way to think about it too is I feel like chaos engineering is a nice evolution on disaster recovery. So if you also link it back to disaster recovery and business continuity planning, then people really understand it. They're like, oh, so, I do my quarterly DR activities. Instead of doing it just quarterly, let's do it more regularly. Let's make sure we pass DR when we're actually being audited. So you can use chaos engineering to proactively make sure you're going to pass it when the DR day comes. So I like that. The other thing that I do at the moment is in 2018, a really amazing book was published called Accelerate. And that book is awesome. It talks about how to practice game days. And it's also based on really amazing data that Gene Kim collected with Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble based on all of the Puppet DevOps reports. So they talk there about how actually stability is so important. You need to have stability first to be able to have speed. So, speed depends on stability. So I definitely recommend that folks should check out that book. But that's basically all that I say. And then everyone's like, okay, you convinced me, let's do it now.
Kind of educate ourselves, right, of what people are already doing. And, there's a body of knowledge, a body of work we're building on. We're not just let's go, whimsically try this out. Exactly. Any thoughts, Paul, from your perspective?
Yeah, Mitch. So going back to the original sort of situation that you painted, which is, okay, I think we really need to do this thing. You walk into your boss's office and we really need to do this thing. And they go, well, we've got a million other things and this is kind of scary. And, we could do a lot of things, but we're not going to do that. Well, you've already walked into your own brick wall. You created a brick wall for yourself. I would say it's not about trying to take the technical tack. It's not about trying to take the culture tack. It just step back and use a framing like situation, impact, result. Look at the business and go, wow, there's quite a few Sev 1 incidents in this particular project. Okay, well, that is directly affecting business. So you don't even have to know the numbers about that to know that that's a pain. That is painful for people to go through in reviews, right? When they have to stand up and say, why is this going down? Or why is this not getting out to production as fast as it should be? Those are very painful moments for VPs of engineering, for product managers, right? And so not to poke them right in their pain spot, but to say, okay, let's start from that space that actually impacts the business or means something to business. Then let's walk back and go, that's the situation. What's the impact to the business? And the result is that we're fighting fires more than we're spending time doing other meaningful things. And so you can do that situation impact result. That's just a framing you can put on things to start to think more like user, more like business. And then start to go, okay, in that landscape of what I know about material impact to the company or the business or the organizational or the division that I'm working for, how would I work this thing that I feel is the right thing to do, the thing that, is It's not just cool and shiny. There's reason for this. How do I work that into that conversation? I used that framing with Fortune 15-ish just yesterday when we were doing a discovery session, right? And then to be able to kind of pivot that across what's the current situation and what's the desired situation. And you can use situation impact result on a current situation as well as on a desired situation, and get a story out there that most people, you hand that to your boss and you go, well, this is actually a set of problems that we experience. We are losing velocity points. We are losing story points to this. Whether you're in the engineering or the product management space, that matters. The impact of this is X, right? I talked with somebody else and they validated that this is some serious impact. This is the quantification of that. And then the result is X. And so the desired situation, if we want to walk backward, situation impact result is result impact situation, is that we actually have to go, if we want this result, we have to have this kind of impact. And therefore we have to have this kind of situation. And oh, by the way, that situation includes resiliency in our thinking. So it's just a way to construct a story that other people can comprehend instead of just starting with the tools and starting with, like, I agree, success stories, Tammy, are very important, right? That's the evidence, that's proof, right? But proof points way down at the bottom before people are even TLDR it for me, right? Like, how does this affect me? How does this affect people above me, right? What if we don't do this? That has to be there, I think, for most people to get it right off the bat.
Yeah, I sometimes coach people, and one of the things I offer is that virtually every manager wants two things. They want people who solve problems, and they like to make decisions, right? They don't just go to meetings. They like to make decisions.
Yeah.
So I can imagine, to what you said, Tammy, about, hey, we're struggling to meet DR. Like the last two have been hell to get through, sort of our own, our own unicorn project or whatever. Or it's, we're having some problems with this part of it. It's just like the third time we've seen this happen. I have some ideas, some things that we can try and share if we wanted to go down that path and see if some of this will help us. So you can come to somebody with, we have this problem, not news to you. I know you're struggling to try to figure out how to solve it. And I've got some ideas, maybe some solutions, and we can try it. And see what kind of results we get. Well, we're close to the end of our time. I'd like to wrap up for have both of you, if you were, and you probably do, if you were mentoring someone in an SRE role, using someone utilizing chaos engineering, or on that journey to bringing that into their organization. I know it's always hard to boil it down to one thing, but what is a piece of advice or learning that you would share to somebody who might be mentoring? Tammy, would you go first?
I think one of the things that I like to say when I'm mentoring folks is what are your own personal goals? And if you imagine yourself in the future in 10 years, what do you want to be doing? And a lot of people, they really want to be the best engineer that they can be possibly. So it's what should I learn? How do I do that? And, how do I share my ideas for what I would like to do? So a lot of it actually is I tell folks to focus on developing your communication skills, but also just be super fun to work with, bring joy to work, make it engaging and exciting for everybody else, share new things that you're learning and finding. And that just creates this awesome, collaborative environment. So, yes, you need to learn your technical skills, but also there's all these other things that are going to really help you with your career, especially if you want to practice chaos engineering. I focus a lot on how can I try and make chaos engineering inspiring and engaging, because I think that's just makes work also more fun and great as well. And you get the results too. So it's win-win,
You do that. You definitely do that. Just preparing for this
example of that,
going through the pantheon of stuff that was out there that Tammy put out there is really great. Speaking of the one bullet point I would say is own your own learning, right? No, I'm as much as we must push the certain responsibility of allowing us to have a knowledge and learning organization in companies. It is the responsibility of the employer to properly coach and bring people up and learn. The fact is, you'll go from organization to organization. What stays the same is you, right? What you're responsible for is still you. And the number one thing that you can do is be responsible for your own learning. So, read books, watch videos, like take time to do this, right? Even if it's a little bit of out of office stuff, definitely have a life separate from work, but find a way to carve some professional development time either into your full-time job if you have the luxury of that, if you have the right culture of that. And if you don't, you're still responsible for yourself. So find the time, the little bit of time, if you can, outside of that, and figure that out. It doesn't have to be hours a week. It can be a half hour a week. It can be small bits. In that, speaking of, I think in the show notes, we'll be adding some links. Tammy, you mentioned one link to a couple of links to
the wiki,
stuff like that.
Yeah.
I sent over the two links is bit.ly/chaos videos and bit.ly/chaos deck. The videos is to a video playlist that I put together of meaningful things, some of which Tammy's in for this show. So if you want to learn more, there's literally dozens of hours of video in total there, and you can kind of start small and figure out what works for you. The deck is also one of the things that I put together for one of the analysts. Our approach is, the approach of chaos engineering and what are some of the factors that go into that journey and how to start engaging people right. That's also there as well.
That's
wonderful. Awesome. Go ahead, jump in there, Tammy.
Oh, just saying that's awesome. Like I find often folks say to me, how do I learn more? Where do I go? So that's really cool that Paul's created these playlists. So I definitely recommend checking that out. That's how I learn. I watch so many videos still, on this exact topic. So I'm continuously trying to grow myself. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to add one piece of advice I would offer is when someone offers you a resource, that means they've been through a lot of things. And this is the top. It's one of the cream of the crop. Yeah. Use it. Take advantage of it. Why wouldn't you take advantage of all their time they've spent finding all those videos, pulling together those wikis, whatever it might be? Yep. Well, Tammy, Brian Buteau, and Paul Bruce, thank you to you both. Thank you to your organizations, Gremlin and Tricentis, for having you with us today. Appreciate all your sharing. I know we could explore this a lot more, and hopefully we'll get to do that in a future topic to you. So thanks, everybody. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. Sure and check out our next DevOps Unbound and our DevOps Unbound roundtables.
Thanks so much, Mitch. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Mitch. All right, ciao.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, we are back. Next up, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2022 virtual event. This one features Jim Walker, who was the principal product evangelist over at Cockroach Labs. He has a presentation titled Principles of the CAP Theorem and a Cloud Native Database. This is an academic talk. It focuses on the CAP theorem and how organizations can utilize it. Includes the 3 guarantees. He also wants to deliver a definition for each and outline how each might affect an organization's distributed system. Lots to unpack in this presentation. We're going to go ahead and roll it right now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to my talk today. I'm going to talk to you about the principles of the CAP theorem. CAP theorem being a kind of a very interesting and a kind of a foundational concept in the world of distributed systems, especially when it comes around to data. But before I get started, just quickly, I'm Jim, by the way. Hi, everybody. I am a principal product evangelist here at Cockroach Labs. I was an engineer, a long time ago. I have an undergrad in computer engineering. I coded for a while. And on Twitter, I am @James. If you are interested in following or reaching out to me or any of those sort of things. I'm also just jim@cockroachlabs.com as well. This session today, I like to give disclaimers. This is kind of intermediate. I'm no expert on these things. I'm not coding them. I do understand them pretty well. And I'm pretty curious about this stuff. Now, I'm a believer in things like the CAP theorem being kind of game changers for careers. And understanding distributed systems to me, I think is one of the most fundamental and foundational things that I think anybody could do right now to prepare themselves for, the advent of what's coming over the next 3 to 5 to 15 years. My experience in kind of working through, over a dozen years, I guess, a little bit longer than that, in this world of tech and software is, we're seeing this kind of categorical shift into this new world of distributed systems. And I think it's all being predicated by this kind of the shift to the cloud and thinking about the ubiquity and the availability and the scale of systems that we have and understanding the CAP theorem and these sort of things, I feel is pretty important because ultimately when it comes down to it, data is kind of the backbone of all the things that we do. In fact, as engineers, I think that's what we do. So today I'm going to talk about the CAP theorem. I'm going to talk about Raft. I'm going to lightly touch on multi-version concurrency control, which is kind of another key important algorithm here. I'm not going to get too deep into that. But then we're talking a little bit about what this means from an active-active database point of view. I think traditionally we think about active-passive systems, and this is kind of a new world. But to start, I think I got to go back in time a little bit. Now, Google in the 2000s was a pretty magical place to be. The amount of innovation that came out of the engineering team there is just truly phenomenal. If we look at, the concepts like, if we think about like Kubernetes and where we're going with distributed systems, all of this is coming out of Google. I worked at a company called CoreOS. We used to call this movement, Google infrastructure for everyone else. Giphy is what we called it. And there's just a lot of technologies. Now, there's two people at Google I think that everybody in the world should be aware of or familiar with, and that's Jeff Dean and Sanjay Gemawat. And some of the innovations and the names of some of the papers that their names are attached to, some of the innovations are just truly phenomenal. If you think about MapReduce and what that did for kind of, it started kind of the Hadoop movement, we're still using that, right? Bigtable and NoSQL, the Google file system, what became Colossus, and thinking about, massive, huge Colossus, these backend systems. Google Spanner, which we're going to talk about some of those concepts here, which is kind of the first of the distributed SQL databases, and TensorFlow, AI/ML. Like these guys, between Jeff Dean and Sanjay Gemawat, this massive, huge amount of innovation between those two. Now, if you want to read more about kind of where they came from, here's a good takeaway. This was way back. I forget the year of this thing, but if you want to talk about the advent of these large scale global systems and how to really scale, this is a really good read. Now, a side note, my employers, this is Peter, Spencer, and Ben in order here. Each of them were in the mid 300 range at Google. I know Peter and Spencer worked on Colossus, which is the backend file system. I know, Ben worked on Reader. So they kind of had a front row view of kind of everything that was going on. In fact, they were part of that initial engineering team to help define all these things. So a lot of the concepts that we saw there are applied in Cockroach Database as well. But there's another person that's actually pretty important when we're talking about CAP theorem in particular. In fact, the CAP theorem is actually called Brewer's theorem. Eric Brewer is another one of these kind of foundational engineers that have really changed our world. And we think about Kubernetes, we think about data, we think about these things. Eric has had a phenomenal impact on the world, I think. He was at a company called Inktomi, and if you go way back in time, Inktomi in the late 90s, and from a search point of view, really doing some interesting things. And then, he joined Google to basically help kind of transform things that were happening there. But if you go back to 1998, he actually wrote a paper and started talking around, the debate around ACID transactions versus base transactions. Base is something we all think about ACID transactions, right? But base was like, basic availability, soft state, eventually consistent. that really kind of became kind of what NoSQL was. And there was this kind of debate around these two things. But Eric really started to think about, what does this mean from a distributed systems point of view? And he actually wrote a paper called the CAP principle. He went and presented that in 2000 at Principles of Distributed Computing conference. And that was really the first of anybody actually going through this. That thing was then since, proved as a theorem in 2002 by a couple of people from MIT. And so that was kind of like the history of where the CAP theorem came from. Now we'll get into it a little bit as well. Now in 2011, Eric finally joined Google, and this was a headline in Wired. It's a great read. Again, meet the man who's rewiring Google from the inside out. And that was really taking everything I've done from a distributed system point and start to really rethink that. And out of that came some really great innovations. And so I always like to give a couple of good takeaways and some good reads. This is a great one as well. Cade Metz is a great writer over at Wired. And this really does give a good sense of what it is. Now, Eric is the first to say he is one person among a team and a massive, huge group of people who kind of reimagined really kind of what Google is. And if you think about Google and the innovation that's happened there and what it's allowed them to do from an innovation and a competitive point of view, truly phenomenal and really engineering led. And I think, for me to talk about the CAP theorem and for me to talk about these concepts without going back and giving credit to some of the people who did this stuff is actually pretty important. Now, if Eric is also a Google scholar, if you go into kind of, if you look through kind of the, all the white papers at Google Scholar, you'll see some of the things that he's attached to as well. By the way, all of the Google publications is another great place to go read and learn a whole lot of great stuff. And here's a list of some best of kind of things from Eric. So again, a couple of good takeaways. So let's talk about the CAP theorem. The CAP theorem basically states, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, it's a theorem, so it's a big, long paper, but it's impossible for a distributed data store to simultaneously provide more than two of the following three guarantees. And this is CAP, right? C is for consistency. So every read is going to get the same data, right? Availability, every request is going to get a response. And then B, partition tolerant, so that if a piece of the system goes away because of a network latency, or it just dies, say a rack or a system or a server or region dies, like it's going to be able to survive that tolerance of a partition being, made between these things. So like a separation between nodes within the system, right? And so basically, if you take those three things, you can only have two of the three. Now, ultimately, in reality, what ends up happening is you have kind of like ranges of the C and the A, but I think the partition thing is actually a pretty important thing. So let's talk about consistency. So two requests are made from different sources against different nodes within the system. The same data will be returned. You will always get the exact same data. So if I do a select star from customer, I'm going to get the same thing no matter who I ask. It isn't going to be some synchronization thing. So there's like a moment in time where you're going to get different data. No, you're going to be guaranteed that the integrity of the data across every single point in that system is going to be the same. Now, availability is you're just going to get a response. Now, the data may not be the same everywhere, but you're going to get a response, right? It's always going to be available everywhere. That data is going to be there. Right. And then partition tolerant, again, basically it's just a piece of there can be a disconnection between, the system. So this is kind of that line in the main. Now, this guarantee is a little special. And to me, the partition tolerance really talks about being distributed, right? Because that is really the nature of a distributed system, is you have multiple different pieces. Now, if you only had, one node, a single server or monolithic server, well, there's no partition to be disrupted, right? So partition is a little bit different. It's like when we really think about the CAP theorem, really we're thinking about CP, consistency and partition tolerant, or AP, available and partition tolerant. And those are really kind of the two sides, the two kind of flavors of database that implement the CAP theorem in a distributed system, right? Like I said, a consistent and available database. This is something like so a CA database, if you take away the partition, this would be, I'm sorry, y'all. So excuse me, I kind of went ahead of myself there. But if you take away the partition tolerance, then basically you're looking at a single node and a single server. This is like a single instance of Postgres or MySQL, right? It's consistent, it's available, right? There is no partition to go away. Now, AP databases it's available and it can survive the failure of some disconnection. This is the NoSQL databases like Mongo and HBase, these sort of things, right? Because you aren't going to be guaranteed the data is correct. They're all kind of eventually consistent, if you will. Now, CP databases are pretty tough to do. This is Spanner, this is Cockroach, my employer, but we're basically guaranteeing you're going to have consistent data, even in the light of having some sort of a partition happen and having some sort of disconnect between the systems and the back end. Those are really end up what people are really concerned about. You got to think about databases as either in CP or AP. And that's really kind of where people go around the cap there in the practical reality of choosing what we're doing in distributed systems. And there's lots of different things. So I want to talk through consistency and availability in a distributed system. We're doing about 9 minutes. We'll go through some concepts pretty quickly. And we're going to talk through a couple of key concepts from the consistency side. Let's just talk about Raft. So Raft is a distributed consensus algorithm that allows you to kind of basically provide kind of atomic writes and reads across a system, right? And so Raft is implemented as a set of replicas, right? And so if you think about this, right, like if you think about the blue things over on the right-hand side, think about those as being kind of copies of data that are written in different places, each of them living on, say, different physical servers, right? And what you do is you have an odd number of replicas. So I have 3, because when I write, I want to make sure 2 of 3 or 3 of 5, right, are correct, right? Like 5 of, so like, and so you make 4 of 7, that sort of thing, right? And so you have a number of replicas, and Raft is a very chatty protocol. Like they're always talking to each other, and we're coalescing heartbeats. So they're kind of all in sync in terms of time and data. And really what a Raft group is doing is saying, like, look at, if I have this data across different, systems, Raft is what's making sure that I have consensus across these different partitions to make sure that it is correct. So we start with a Raft group. Now there's this concept of a Raft leader. Now a Raft leader is elected, and there's a process in which the participants in a Raft group actually elect that leader. But the Raft leader is a special kind of node, if you will, in this group, right? It kind of coordinates everything within the Raft group. So if I'm going to write something, I'll say, hey, Raft leader, write this. And it's going to say, hey, my followers, the 2 others, write this as well. And as soon as one of them comes back and says, I'm good, I have quorum. 2 of 3 have actually wrote that. Or if I had 5, then 3 of 5 actually acknowledge I have quorum. And basically the Raft leader is the kind of definitive, authoritative, up-to-date version of what that is. And nothing gets committed in the followers unless it's aligned with what's exactly in the Raft leader. We use markers, we use temporary records, that sort of thing. And then once the Raft leader says everything's good, it means everything in the followers are good. And that's what's going to guarantee consensus, and that it's going to be the same and consistent across everywhere. And that's a really important point in the concept of consistency in a distributed system, right? Because what the Raft leader is doing is saying, I'm going to get this atomic replication. Again, I'm going to tell the Raft leader, and the Raft leader is now responsible for making sure that the followers are all in order. Right. And that's how we're actually getting this kind of consensus. And we're going to guarantee consistency. Now, listen, Raft seems like a pretty simple thing for me to explain. I think Ben Darnell, our chief architect here at Cockroach Lab, said, I can talk about Raft and we can do a simple implementation of it as part of, say, a graduate course. But to actually do this in production, in reality, for modern systems, it's taken years for us to perfect this, because it's all the corner cases that can go wrong. And so it's a lot more complex than that. I mean, it's a pretty simple concept to kind of go through. Now, there's another protocol, another distributed consensus algorithm called Paxos, which I know Spanner uses that. It's also equally interesting as well, but I'm just going to go through Raft. Now, if you want to actually learn more about Raft and how this stuff works, again, I don't know how many people I've sent to this website, but the secretlivesofdata.com is really a phenomenal source for you to go out and actually learn more about this protocol and how it works, how leaders are elected, how it communicates, a little bit more detail in how it actually coordinates that the data is going to be the same across, the various different participants in the entirety of the thing. So pretty useful piece. Go check it out. It's actually great. So I'm happy to actually drive traffic to this site. I think it's really good. So there's another concept, and I'm not going to get too deep into this today, and it's called multi-version concurrency control. And what it's doing is saying that there's no overlap of transactions. So if you think about ACID transaction, this is the isolation in transactions. And this is basically saying that, look, when a transaction comes into a system, and I'm going to commit that using distributed consensus. Well, what happens if I'm executing on that transaction and I'm using Raft to do all this coordination, and another transaction comes in at the same time that overlaps that transaction? And so like I need to make sure that things are happening in order. And so this is, to the point where we use it, we talk a lot about serializable isolation. So how do we make sure that things are happening so that it's kind of like a checkout line at the grocery store? There's people in line and you only check out one person at a time. You only commit one transaction at a time. So it's actually a pretty interesting and important algorithm as well. I know I've gone through this in other CAP theorem recordings. I know on our website, we don't have enough time to go through this now. In fact, the Wikipedia article on MVCC is actually pretty good and a good resource to go actually learn what that is. But it's another key piece of consistency, because in Raft, we have these groups. We're going to have thousands, hundreds of thousands of those in a database. How are we making sure that's guaranteed correct across all the different participants of that database? So MVCC is another great algorithm to go out and actually learn a whole lot about, and some really interesting stuff there as well. Okay, great. So now let's talk. So that's consistency. Raft and MVCC are a big piece of that. But using those two kind of concepts in Brewer's theorem here, I like to call it Brewer's theorem. It's going to make sure that you get that same data returned everywhere. And so I hope that that's helpful for you thus far. So let's talk a little bit about availability. And again, storage and Raft are also critical concepts here. And actually, Raft is used to get this distributed consensus, but Raft is also used to basically like understand, where in the system these things physically, right? Because, when we write, say we have this replica set of 3 kind of copies of data, right? Well, what if I have like 15 different servers participating in that? Am I writing, I should probably have them across 3 different physical servers out of the 15. And Raft actually helps us distribute that data within the system as well, right? And so Raft is actually pretty critical to availability as well in a distributed database as well. So how do we get availability today? Typically, this is what I learned. You have a primary and a secondary instance of your database. The primary is serving up queries. That thing fails, you fail over to the secondary, you try to fix the primary, you bring that primary back down line, you bring the secondary back, and then you have some sort of kind of reclamation of a remediation between the two systems. Typically what's happening also when you write to the primary, you're synchronizing, asynchronously, the secondary. So the secondary is going to be out of sync a little bit. So what happens when it fails and the secondary comes up? Is the data in the correct exact form? Did all that synchronization happen? There's a lot of issues involved in doing this. And namely, I think one of the biggest pieces is the cost equation. Getting a huge, massive license for a database that's never used or very rarely used is pretty expensive. These are pretty big machines, depending on how big you're going to go. There's this kind of extended RTO as these kind of failovers that happen. But I think one of the things that actually is lost sometimes is this remediation time. When I switch to a secondary and back to a primary, how do I go through the database and all the records to make sure that they are going to be synced up and the secondary is going to be exactly as the primary was, and everything that happened in the secondary is actually committed into the primary, because they are out of sync. What's the delta between the two of them, and how do you remediate that? So the active passive system has worked for years, and it's great. And we've been using this. Now, there are, like I said, though, there's these issues, and I think there's just a better way, right? Oh, and by the way, we also need to survive regional failures, right? Because it's no longer like I'm working in a single data center where I had the active and passive system, so, primary, secondary, and they were on, a rack sitting next to each other. We're putting these things in different parts of the country because ultimately, we're deploying in the cloud, and like it or not, entire regions go down. And so, with this, if you think about the synchronization time between two servers sitting next to each other, pretty quick, right? It's Ethernet, it's pretty fast. But what happens when you have the speed of light going on and you're going across the country to actually do this? The synchronization problems actually become real. And I think there's some big challenges here, right? So implementing this a different way, thinking about an active database is really what's going to allow us to do this. And this is, how do we take these core principal systems and apply them to a database so that, a cluster of physical nodes is just going to appear as a single logical store. I can ask anything. I could ask, a node in the east or the west or the central, whatever, and it's going to get that same deed. Every node should accept reads and writes. you don't have, a massively multi-master system. And multi-master is another of these distributed system concepts that it talks about how these things work from a transactional point of view. I can't have like one single write node because that's a single point of failure. And it's just as bad as the active passive system. Everything should be able to do reads and writes, and it should get consensus, not synchronization. We should get consensus. And that whole concept of raft and getting the right data in the right places is the critical point there. Eliminating this synchronization thing and spanning across the whole world. And then if we're going to be a database, I think NoSQL databases are good for certain workloads. And if you think about the document model, it's great for certain things. But I think when I think about, some of the more critical business applications, thinking about normalization data, thinking about referential integrity, thinking about secondary indexes and materializing views and everything the relational model gives us, how do we do that in the context of a distributed system? And that's what an active relational database is all about, right? So, and it's really kind of emerged over the past couple of years. There's an emerging group of vendors that are doing this thing called distributed SQL, of which I'm definitely part of that here at Cockroach Labs. So, there's huge value in this approach because I don't have to worry about sharding anymore. I don't, and all the complexities in code and managing the back end. You think about 2 shards, think about 5, think about 10. Man, that's complexity. I don't have to worry about dealing with the operational details of the database in the back end and setting up this active passive systems, right? If everything can accept reads and writes and I can survive the failure of a particular node, am I eliminating downtime, both planned and unplanned? Because with these systems, you can take a node down and bring it back, and you can maybe upgrade, right? And so the whole these massive, huge operational efficiencies that an active database gives are all being driven by this simple concept called the CAP theorem. And so let's talk through it. So this is just familiar SQL, but if we think about availability, what we're doing is we're using raft to write data in triplicate. So here's 6 physical instances, right? And I'm writing this Mueller record 3 different times. It's now living in 3 different spots. So if I lose one of the nodes, right, physically lose, partition tolerant, it goes away, it dies, I still have 2 copies. I still have consensus. 2 of 3 are correct. Now, Raft is smart enough to actually, if I lose something and I only have 5 left, create the last replica somewhere because, it's very chatty. It's like, hey, I'm missing my brother, man. I'm missing my sister. What's going on? What do I do? It's smart enough to actually heal these Raft groups as well. So you're always going to have 3, right? And so Raft is a critical piece of this, and really kind of Raft is saying let's physically place these things in different physical places so we can be partition tolerant, and that's really kind of a core part of availability. Another thing is every node is a gateway to the entirety of the database. So every node is an endpoint. I can ask, user 1 is asking a node here from Mueller, and it isn't stored there. But the system, the single logical database, the backend, this distributed database, understands where to go to the RAF leader. It knows where that RAF leader is and says, hey, RAF leader, get me this Mueller record, right? I could ask any node. And that's the whole point. The endpoint, it doesn't matter where we go. Everything is a gateway. Everything is an endpoint. And it's one big single logical database. It just looks like one database. I could set up a load balancer and just start going against any one of these things. It doesn't matter. The database is smart enough to understand where that RAF leader is to get that authoritative resource. And right now it's in the middle top right there. And so developers don't need to know where data resides, like when you're doing sharding, these sort of things, right? It's pretty straightforward, and all that's taken care of for you. But we also need to survive regional failures. We talked about this, right? So nodes can reside across zones, right? And this allows for kind of, there's 2 reasons you do this. From this kind of this backup, an entire region go down. If I still had, 2 copies of, say the East Coast goes down, and I have 2 copies in region 2 and region 3, like we were just talking about, I could survive that. But more importantly, don't we want to put records close to users, right? We're dealing with the speed of light these days. How fast? What's the latency? Think about this as a global point of view. Maybe I had a set of nodes that are in Sydney. It's 250, 300 milliseconds to go across the planet. Well, that's a lot when you're going back and forth. And so this also helps with latency. Not only is it great for kind of this resilience and availability point of view, but it also helps with latency, right? So I can survive the failure. Say this entire region goes out. My load balancer just switches over to another region, and everybody that was hitting that is now being serviced data across another place. And then when it comes back online, It just simply redistributes that data and makes sure everything is kind of even across the various different ways, depending on what your latency and resiliency goals are. And it just kind of takes care of that. All of that is done without any kind of interaction with a system admin or DevOps or SRE, right? All of this is automated, right? So let's just kind of take these kind of horrible moments in life around availability and get them back. Now, listen, is this 100% available? No. Can we get to say, 3 nines or 5 nines? Yes. And that's what I mean by like in the context of the CAP theorem, we can guarantee consistency, always correct. But we can have a range of availability in data, right? It's kind of like in an AP database, like a NoSQL database. I'm going to guarantee you're going to get that data, right? It's really good. But I'm not going to guarantee 100% of the time it's consistency. And so the trade-offs are basically this kind of sliding range around C&A, but always being partition tolerant and kind of, pegged on the C or the A in the context of the CAP theorem, right? Again, Raft, and again, a commercial for my friend there. So again, availability is kind of driven by Raft and some other things and these things, right? So I think about AP databases, again, you're going to have a range of consistency, but you are going to be guaranteed available. So with the CP database, again, you're going to be worried about, getting the exact right data all the time, but it's going to be a range of availability, right? And so when we think about CAP theorem, it really comes down to the 3 concepts: consistency, availability, and partition tolerant. And there's 2 types of database, a CP database and an AP database. And that's really kind of the principles of the CAP theorem. And so that's pretty much all of my talk. Real quickly, CockroachDB is a CP database. This is SQL. This is a relational database. Everything, we're wire compatible with Postgres. You get started today with our serverless version. It's pretty cool. But we also offer a dedicated version of this as well. But really for us, it's like, let's make the future familiar. Let's get rid of the problems of downtime and ops and scale and everything we were just talking about. And let's make it really simple for you to go out and build apps. Like just code against SQL. This just makes sure that you don't have to worry about manual sharding or any of these kind of upgrades or downtimes and any of these things. So that's what we're all about. And we would love for you to go out and try, CockroachDB. Just cockroachlabs.com is where you go. But I hope this was valuable. Less, from go out and try this thing, but just as an overview of the CAP theorem itself. And I really thank everybody for taking the time to view our presentation today.
Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that offers up 5 steps to a more sustainable DevOps. The rise of remote workforces, cryptocurrencies, and supersized data centers brings to the forefront a concern in tech development that doesn't get enough attention: the impact of computing and advanced technologies on the environment. While environmental issues have been a matter of growing concern for decades, the past few years have put a particularly intense focus on the issue, with entire industries growing up around everything from climate-friendly investing to carbon offsets and more. The environmental impact of technology has become an issue, yet unresolved, in spite of a growing focus on sustainability. This article looks at how organizations can use DevOps to help reduce their carbon footprint and some of the specific steps they can take to clean up their DevOps process and become part of the solution rather than contributing to the problem. And we take a closer look at Azure DevOps. Microsoft's Azure DevOps Server is emerging as one of the most popular cloud application development environments. Like most CI/CD platforms, it includes features such as version control, reporting, project management, automated builds, and testing. It covers all aspects of the application lifecycle and enables DevOps. Azure DevOps provides a number of different developer services that allow DevOps teams to plan work, collaborate on code development, and build and deploy applications. It is highly collaborative and brings together developers, project managers, and individual contributors to develop software. It allows organizations to create and improve products much faster than with traditional software development approaches. This article takes a deep dive into all of the features of Microsoft Azure as a DevOps platform and offers some key points for organizations to consider when evaluating Azure for their DevOps environments. Also, we have the results of a survey by Era Software that shows more organizations are grappling with a crippling amount of log data. More than 3/4 of respondents also believe the overall cost of observability and log management will skyrocket in 2022 if current tools don't evolve. These and other results of this survey show that the cost of storing all their log data is becoming a significant challenge as organizations rely more on logs to analyze IT events. Use of observability tools and platforms has jumped by 180% as IT teams struggle to manage increasingly complex IT environments. Observability has been a core tenet of DevOps best practices, but achieving it has always been a challenge. These survey results show that organizations still haven't cracked the nut despite best efforts. All right, over on Container Journal, we have 4 best practices for Kubernetes reliability. One of the main constructs linked to successful Kubernetes deployments is reliability. In the world of Kubernetes, reliability means building a stable, dependable platform so developers and DevOps teams can streamline their processes and ship applications faster with fewer headaches. To achieve this state of deployment nirvana, platform engineering teams must also partner with development to ensure workloads are configured correctly from the start, a practice many organizations fail to do well. Kubernetes misconfigurations are more common than one might think and can dramatically impact the security, reliability, and efficiency of containerized workloads. In fact, proper cloud-native configuration lingers among the top concerns for practitioners, as well as one of the most critical steps in a set of Kubernetes best practices. Ensuring the health of your Kubernetes clusters via best practices means acknowledging the need for proper Kubernetes configuration. This article goes into detail what is necessary for proper Kubernetes configurations and 4 things organizations can do to get started down the right path. And we take a look at 5 key considerations for Kubernetes in production. As containers and Kubernetes in production become mainstream, enterprises are looking for guardrails to put in place before going live to ensure their environments are reliable and that they follow governance, compliance, and security best practices. To reap the benefits of containers and avoid chaos, organizations must carefully plan and prepare before going live. Production readiness is a methodical process that takes time and gives predictable structure and consistency to the work. Throughout the process, organizations should engage their teams to work together and align the business and technical goals of the platform. While each organization's road to production is different, there are common key areas to focus on, including the platform itself, resource management, operations, security, and governance. This article takes a look at the role each of these areas plays and ways they work together to ensure a consistent experience. And finally, on Security Boulevard, we pose the question, should the West build its own Great Firewall? Lost amid all the focus on China's Great Firewall and Beijing's effort to censor what its citizens can see and say is the undeniable capability afforded to a nation's defensive posture through a sovereign intranet. That is a fact that likely contributed to Russia's decision to build its own. Last June and July, Russia's government disconnected its national internet from the global network to test its sovereign internet called RUNET. After it adopted a sovereign internet law in 2019 aimed at ensuring the country could still function if it was cut off from global networks. Under this law, the country's telecommunications companies were mandated to cooperate with the government and annually test this kind of disconnection. Unsurprisingly, the law and its implementation prompted concerns by civil rights and free speech advocates, who saw the move as an effort by the Kremlin to further control what was said and seen on the domestic internet. Similar concerns have been raised about China's implementation. These are reasonable concerns, and there exists sufficient evidence to confirm these networks are exploited in such ways. That said, having a sovereign intranet that protects and maintains our critical infrastructure during periods of conflict, global conflict, is an idea worth considering, according to this article. If the global landscape shifts to such an extent that nation-states are openly engaging in cyber warfare against critical services, organizations would be as effective at protecting their infrastructure as sandcastles are at stopping the tide. It should be a priority for legislators to adopt strategies that improve the preparedness of our critical infrastructure should an event occur. And finally, we look at identity and access management as the foundation for zero trust. Last year's attack on Colonial Pipeline occurred because of misused or stolen credentials, underscoring the fact that adopting zero trust methodology must start with identity and access management. IAM, or Identity and Access Management, is the foundation of zero trust and makes every other facet of the methodology possible, from multi-factor authentication and single sign-on to the context and risk-based policies that trigger authentication requests to keep an organization's network secure. It ensures every account is onboarded and offboarded properly, avoiding access creep that can make a network vulnerable. And it is the first step to a passwordless authentication future, eliminating the most common way malicious actors can access and attack a network. This article looks at the many ways identity and access management anchor many security strategies being used today, including zero trust, and ways in which organizations can effectively adopt identity and access management as part of their security toolkit. All right, that's it for the headlines. Please check back with me on Thursday when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Joe Partlow, who is the CTO of ReliaQuest. Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me, Charlene. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. So want to talk to you a little bit about security tooling and what organizations are dealing with these days. But first, I wonder if you can introduce us to ReliaQuest.
Yeah, so ReliaQuest is a security firm based out of Florida, but we have global operations, and really has kind of evolved into an open XDR as a service. And really, kind of what that means is operationalizing company security programs. So whether that's integrating the various tools that they may be using in their environment, automating any of the processes, procedures, obviously incident response and health and security of kind of the corporation, really bringing that all together in kind of a platform and services that we call Gray Matter. And it's really kind of an incident response platform that we've evolved over the years that adds in a lot of capabilities with that.
Often. Well, that's awesome. Great. It sounds like a really, really nice platform, especially when you think about the amount of security tooling and software and applications that organizations are dealing with these days. It sounds like your technology is a great way to kind of pull it all together.
Yeah, most companies are certainly, that's a challenge for them, right? I think on average, last time I looked, there's probably, a good 30 to 40 different categories of technologies that most security programs have to deal with. So, how do you make sure all of that is healthy and reporting in what it should and doing all that detection that it should? It's certainly a overwhelming task for a lot of teams, which especially have been hard to fill kind of open positions.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about that lately. I actually just had another conversation with somebody. We were talking about the Great Resignation and maybe how it's actually should be called the Great Reshuffling because, people are just kind of moving around so much. It's we're living in a very dynamic environment these days, it seems like. So I do want to dig into more of this whole idea of security tool sprawl and what organizations really need to do to kind of harness their security applications and really create a more cohesive security footprint. I feel like there are so many different security technologies that exist today that it really has become kind of a mulligan stew, if you will, of security in organizations, and so much so that there really doesn't seem to be a good blueprint, if you will. Organizations have so many different things that they're trying, all the different challenges that they're trying to address with the technology. And I feel like it's gotten to be too much. What are you guys seeing in this space?
Yeah, and certainly being in this space for a long time, it's kind of, we've been a victim of our own success a little bit, right? In the early days, you're lucky if you had a firewall, and that was pretty much it. But as tools have got better and new capabilities have come out, there's been a lot of vendors that have filled that niche, and it's been great, right? Because now we've had capabilities and ways to see and do things that we had never had in the past. The problem is, those evolve quicker than we can integrate them back in or roll them back into kind of one platform. So while it's been better that we've got a lot more visibility and a lot more capabilities, it's really hasn't been tied together or timed in a way, shape, or fashion. So it's been kind of a free for all, and the teams have had to struggle to kind of keep up with that. So it's kind of a mixed bag of problems. A good problem, but then it's still a problem.
Right. Exactly. It's the brain can only process so much, right? And so especially when we're talking about security and applications, I feel like we see a problem, we throw a technology at it. We see another problem, we throw another technology at it. And we keep kind of piling it on. Nobody's really thinking about whether this tool up here may have actually addressed a problem down here, and we could have killed two birds with one stone. And so there's, I don't know that we're actually getting the value from the applications that we're investing in, because there are so many kind of one-off security applications addressing one particular problem or two particular problems, that there really doesn't seem to be any kind of organization, if you will, to a lot of security strategies within an organization. Their security strategy is basically just throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. So is there an easy answer to this, or is it something that we're going to continue to grapple with for a while?
Yeah, unfortunately, the easy answer you've kind of hit on, Charlene, is that it's, hey, if I have a need, there's a quick niche to fill that in, right? And go to any security conference and you'll see 20 vendors that will promise to do that. It's got tricky, right? Because as vendors have matured and added more capabilities in their product, because they see opportunities to get into some of those spaces. The problem that we see a lot of times for many security teams is, the tool or the platform will get deployed, and maybe they're using 20% of it because one, they just maybe didn't have the time to fully deploy it out, or just didn't have the understanding or the time to actually get it fully baked. And then a lot of times the tool gets a bad rap, and it's, this doesn't work. Well, it was never really kind of rolled out the right way, and there's always some new kind of shiny new tool coming down the pike. So obviously we want to keep current on technology, but a lot of times we see a lot of shelfware out there, or that could just be because of lack of training or turnover. Or there's many times where new teams will get brought in that we see in a corporate environment, and they didn't even know they had certain tools because it was sitting off in the background somewhere.
Yeah, and you mentioned turnover, and that's a huge thing these days, especially in the security teams. That in many organizations, turnover is high because they just get burned out so quickly. Because if you think about the amount of cybersecurity threats that are out there today, it's like every day there's a fire drill. It's something that they've got to take care of. And I think I read something that the average CISO's tenure is something on the order of 18 months, which is, I mean, that just boggles my mind. And this is the person who's supposed to be heading up the entire cybersecurity operations for an organization. I imagine that alone contributes quite a bit to the fact that there are cybersecurity technologies in an organization that maybe some people don't even know about, because there's just, the CISO adopted the technology, approved it, it got installed, that person left, and the new person came in, really had no idea. Nobody had taken an inventory of their cybersecurity applications set or anything. And so there's no tribal knowledge left with that amount of turnover.
Yeah, no, you touch on a thing that is really the biggest problem, like tribal knowledge that, a system administrator or a network administrator, a lot of times those folks, they kind of knew where the skeletons were hidden in the closet, right? So that person kind of really knew a lot. But like you said, CISOs and even the security team we're seeing is turning over 18 to 24 months at a time. And a lot of times it's maybe going to another division in the same company, or obviously the security market is pretty hot right now. So there's a lot of folks, looking to kind of make that move, especially in the last couple of years with, more remote positions opened. That's opened up a lot of opportunity too. So yeah, I think, it's easy to get discouraged, right? In security. Security is not an entry-level field. There's a lot going on. It's easy to get discouraged, like you said, with all the fire drills. So to keep people from getting burnt out, having a whole set of tools that they have to keep up and running contributes to that a little bit. It's not the reason why a lot of these folks got in. Most people like doing the incident response process and really kind of solving problems, not dealing with 10,000 alerts coming off of some noisy tool.
Yeah, well, I kind of joked at the beginning of the pandemic that, I think Slack will be the death of us, because my entire day was spent answering Slack messages from all the other employees who are working remote. And it's like death by 1,000 Slack messages. But yeah, in this case, it would be death by 1,000 security alerts. And I can imagine, especially if a security team is working remotely, that's a 24-hour job. And when you're working remotely, it's hard to disconnect sometimes when your Slack is going off and you've got security alerts that are pinging you at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. So I imagine that's also contributing to that kind of massive burnout that a lot of security professionals are feeling these days.
Oh, yeah, especially if your team is really half of what it should be for the size of your organization, and you're dealing with 3 or 4 or 5 different technologies, keeping those up and running, it does take its toll. And it's funny, not funny, but if you look back a lot of the major breaches and incidents that we've seen in the past few years, more times than not, there was some indicator or some alert that something shady was happening. It was just lost in the noise. And, if someone's got 5 or 6 different tools that they have to monitor and, keep track of, it's easy to see why that stuff maybe gets lost sometimes.
Yeah. So I know that there are a lot of different alerting technologies out there. And to your point, though, there's still a lot going on out there. So I feel like we haven't really cracked the nut when it comes to understanding the ability to properly prioritize security alerts, and I'm sure it's different in every organization, but I almost feel like maybe this is something that the organization is probably better off not even having to deal with on its own. That it maybe it is time to look into using a managed services provider, or an as a service provider to help them kind of at least kind of manage the security incident levels, and help them understand really, what's an alert, and then what's an alert, right. and kind of separate. What do they say? Separate the noise from, what is it? I can't remember. The information from the noise, or something like that.
Or make it actionable. We talk about actionable events versus not actionable.
Exactly.
And it's certainly kind of what we've been living for, the past decade or so, and kind of the space that we play in. But, if you look back at kind of, there was this shift a few years back to kind of get everything, that we must have a big data lake, and all the security events and other info. We try to get into kind of these big data lakes to try to corral it and get kind of that single pane of glass. And whether it was tool sprawl or information sprawl or just corporate application sprawl, and then as kind of cloud platforms got bigger and more, took over a lot of kind of centralized spots, that's contributed to that a little bit. And that's really something that we've kind of, to be successful, we feel like you've really kind of got to go to the source of that data. It's too hard to bring it all in one. There's too much data out there. You really have to have those detections at the source or closest to the data, and then have a way to correlate those. Unfortunately, business kind of moves too fast to, integrate and centralize everything as much as we would like. So you really kind of have to be, all places at the same time.
So do you think organizations are getting better at it then, at least recognizing the fact that they have a problem? And then, they say the first step in fixing a problem is recognizing that you have one in the first place. So do you think we're there yet, or do you think that we're still going to be experiencing a lot more pain before we finally get some sort of resolution?
Yeah, I do feel like, most organizations, even up to the board level, have really kind of, in recent years realized, especially with ransomware and a lot of, you tuned into the news and there's always something happening. The awareness is certainly there. I think the challenge that we see from most customers is the speed that their business is moving at, whether it's acquisition or mergers or expanding into cloud environments, just keeping up with it. So the awareness is definitely there. That's the challenge that we see is well, how do you get visibility to that? And how do you do proactive, detections and threat hunting and all the good stuff that you want to do to try to get out in front of it? Mm-hmm. Trying to keep pace with the business is kind of the biggest challenge that we see. And obviously that contributes to the incidents, right? If you can't secure what you don't know about. So that's kind of the biggest challenge that we see. But luckily, I think, up to the board level, we're definitely seeing a lot more buy-in, and security is really kind of at the forefront more so than it has been in the past.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with you, especially with, as you said, with the number of ransomware attacks and other cyber attacks that have been happening over the last 2 years. It really has become an imperative for organizations to make cybersecurity the highest priority, I would say, within the organization. A lot of people say that, it's really all about the customer experience. Well, if you can't get to your customer, then, there is no customer experience to be had. So I think protection of the networks and the data should be top priority for organizations. And I also do think that that organizations are a lot better about recognizing the fact that they do need help when it comes to cybersecurity and ensuring that that their networks and all of their data, if it's on premises or in the cloud or a combination of the two, are being protected appropriately. And whether that's done through an in-house application tool set or through the use of a managed services provider or some other means, I think the organizations are becoming a lot more comfortable with the idea of getting the proper amount of help that they need from wherever it comes. So I think you guys probably are in a very, very good spot to be able to provide that to customers, really, no matter what size organization, because it really doesn't matter how big you are. You do need cybersecurity for end to end. It's just it's a matter of doing business these days.
Yeah. And luckily we're in a spot where a lot of times we're providing that consistency. If that team is turning over every year or so, a lot of times we're kind of being the ones in the background that's training up that new team, and getting them up to speed on, hey, here, what do you have? What are the issues that we're working on? And you kind of hit on something too, like for the tool sprawl, another reason why we're seeing some of that is that with the business being typically siloed away from the security team, and the security team really not understanding the why behind the business, mm-hmm. They're just going to go out, typically we see them just go out and buy a bunch of tools and, all right, well, I got to solve every problem and I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at it and hopefully something sticks. Right. Whereas now, having that security team and the business closer aligned, you can really kind of focus and say, well, hey, my top 3 business risks are this. And maybe I don't need 20 tools to solve that problem. I can, solve 80% of the problem with this one. So that's a good trend that we're seeing, at least, is that now that security is kind of more to the forefront, being aligned more with the business, hopefully that will avoid security teams just thinking they have to cast the net over everything and protect against every single thing that's out there versus focusing on the most important.
Yeah, well, I hope that organizations do recognize that security tool sprawl can actually be, it could actually help work against their cybersecurity efforts. If you've got too many tools and they're all kind of, working, against each other, sometimes that actually can hinder a cybersecurity operation, or kind of retract the footprint rather than expand it. So I think there's a lot to be said about having a second set of eyes, if you will, on a cybersecurity program within an organization. So good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, we're nobody's an expert in every single tool, but having kind of another group of folks that maybe see these tools a lot more across, the customer base or something, that certainly helps, ramping new team members up on the customer side.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with this topic.
Sure.
We could talk for a lot longer than we have been, but unfortunately we are out of time. Joe, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me about this. I'm sure we'll be having more conversations in the future. Cybersecurity is a topic that is not going away anytime soon. So there's as many problems as we'll have, there will also be as many answers. So thanks again for taking the time today. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Charlene. Glad to be on.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. I got 3 here for you that are happening this week, so hopefully you'll be able to mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called Culture Clash on PagerDuty, why DevOps, SRE, and cybersecurity cultures differ. This one is happening Wednesday, March 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard, and it's sponsored by Sonatype. The most beautiful thing about SRE is your error budget. But in cybersecurity, error budgets just can't happen when a critical vulnerability is found in zero-day events. This is a great opportunity for SREs, cybersecurity engineers, and researchers, and especially the managers who oversee these roles. There are incredibly different methods and motivations for accelerating delivery and tolerating some risk with an error budget, and the cybersecurity approach of zero tolerance to critical vulnerabilities. Both approaches are absolutely necessary to keep software running in the real world. This webinar focuses on how to structurally support shared teams and shared aims with SLOs to create a better culture across teams in modern DevOps-driven enterprises. The second webinar is called A Framework for GitOps App Recoverability with Red Hat, OpenShift, and Twilio Vault. It's a mouthful. This one is happening Thursday, March 24th at 9 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Twilio and Red Hat. GitOps expands the use of DevOps best practices across the Kubernetes application lifecycle, including deployment, development, testing, infrastructure configuration and lifecycle management, and resiliency. To enable this, administrators can configure and manage Red Hat OpenShift GitOps through Argo CD. But regardless of whether your OpenShift clusters are hosted on-premises or in the cloud, unexpected downtime can happen. For enterprises, finding the root cause and recovering from outages quickly is paramount. This webinar will show how to ensure application recoverability across Red Hat OpenShift clusters for any private, public, or multi-cloud services. All right, the final webinar today is called Zero Trust Security for Containers, Kubernetes and Container Workloads. This one is happening Tuesday, March 29th. Oh, that's next week. So there you go. Tuesday, March 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This one is sponsored by NewVector. Any mission-critical workloads require full lifecycle security coverage, and a zero-trust security approach can proactively protect your pipeline, supply chain, test environments, and the critical production runtime environment. Container applications, the Kubernetes platform, and hosts themselves also need to be secured as a full cloud-native stack. This webinar will offer up how to use the NewVector security platform as a complete solution to enforce zero-trust controls with built-in security automation capabilities. Another great one there. Hope you can join us for all three of these. And meanwhile, please check back with me on Thursday when I will have a fresh new batch of webinar previews for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, we're back, everybody. Last but certainly not least on today's broadcast, we have The View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard is speaking with Om Vyas, who is the Chief Product Officer over at Oak9. They're discussing why security engineers need to become part of every DevOps team. Certainly something we can all get behind, and it is a great conversation. So let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Om Vyas, who's Chief Product Officer for Oak9. We're going to be talking about all things related to DevSecOps and cloud security. Om, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike.
We, of course, have been talking about DevOps for the better part of a decade, and then we decided that the security people couldn't be left out, but they wanted to have the word sec thrown in there to make things a little more confusing. So then we got DevSecOps, and some of them even argued that I guess it should be SecDevOps, but who knows? My question to you is, it seems like we're still struggling with getting this idea across to people. It's become more important in the cloud era, obviously, because more developers are programming stuff. But what, from your perspective, is the fundamental challenges that we're seeing with getting people to really implement best DevSecOps practices?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we take a quick step back, right, I think you hit it on the head, right? I mean, there's DevOps, there's DevSecOps, there's, SecOps, there's a lot of buzzwords and a lot of different ways that, these adoptions are being thrown around, right? I think fundamentally, my take is, DevSecOps or DevOps, right? It's first and foremost a cultural transformation, right? The technology and the people process really come after. So really one of the biggest challenges is, that embracing this notion of being able to work together, being able to have shared responsibility in a collaborative environment, right? If you think about, kind of where we've come from and, in fear of dating myself, right? I'll say that, when I used to develop long ago, with my development teams, right? It was really, our focus was only towards application development. And then it was like, the packaging, the artifacts, once they were created, it was like, hey, kind of, the notion around, hey, throw it over the wall to IT ops people, or having a formalized security review processes, right? And really this cultural transformation is I think, a key area where I think a lot of the folks in the, a lot of the organizations, they're struggling, right? They're struggling to embrace the culture of DevOps, culture of DevSecOps. And then when you factor in, as you said it yourself in the beginning, right, is that the security people are getting left behind. And what that really means is they don't have the visibility and they don't have the automation to being able to keep up with the amount of churn that's happening with the development, the DevOps, right? Because the dev teams are using the automation, which is the technology part of this transformation, to really, create this velocity, right, in which they are churning over new features, doing rapid deployments into production, right? 5-7 years ago, we used to do maybe like one release a month, one release a quarter. And now, I'm seeing organizations, ours included, where we're doing tens of releases a day, hundreds of releases a day. So this is really where the security or the SEC part of the DevSecOps is really struggling to keep up with that velocity and that change.
Does that mean we need to slow down, or can we build and deploy secure applications just as fast? What's the trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think maybe slow down is not the right answer, because I think, velocity is really being utilized as a differentiation for a lot of the organizations, right? I think the right answer is, I think not necessarily just slow down to a halt. The right answer, in my opinion, is, really how do we integrate security into the processes of DevOps, right? To truly give them the visibility at the point of time when these changes are happening, and then really arm them with the automation that they really need to give them full visibility, give them ability to be able to really quickly identify how that application is changing, right? How are those new capabilities that are being added, how is that impacting security of that application? And the sooner we give visibility to security engineering of all of those changes and where security matters in those changes, the sooner we can continue to operate with that velocity.
How do we go about doing that? Because a lot of the developers, they didn't really set out to build something that's insecure. It's just more often than not, they have a tool that lets them manage a cloud as infrastructure as code, but then they misconfigure something because they're not security experts, and maybe a port gets left open or something like that occurs. So how do we lock all that down, and how do we kind of tighten that up without necessarily requiring the developer to become a security expert? Because that seems unlikely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that, a developer is not a security expert. And I think if you look at kind of where, dev engineering is today, especially with the cloud native architecture, especially with, DevOps, it's dev engineering or developers are taking on a lot more responsibility, right? But I do think that I think, as a developer myself, right, like what I'm interested in is, it's not that I don't care about security, right? It's that what I want to know is, hey, help me understand what I need to do to move fast, right? What do I need to do? What are the 5 things or 10 things or whatever number of things that are relevant or related to security that I can do to not only help my security team, but really quickly move this feature capability from development and implementation to testing and to production, right? So from that perspective, right, I think what really also helps is if I had the ability to, within my own workflow, within my own tools, if somebody educated me and gave me the kind of the prescriptive guidance of, hey, here are all the things, you need to do to ensure that all of these different security aspects of security related things in this infrastructure as code that you change, here's what you need to be aware of, here's what you need to change, and to really help you move forward, right? I think that's what I think as a developer I'm looking for, right? Because again, I have many different things that I'm managing today beyond just application code.
Mm-hmm. How automated can all this get? It seems to me the key to this whole thing is if the developers still need to program the cloud environment, we need to find a way for them to make fewer mistakes, put more guardrails in place, and kind of just gently lock down the environment, I guess is the phrase I say. So what is the challenge? What is the state of the art at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you said gently lock down the environment, right? I think absolutely right. I mean, I think that developers, what we're seeing today, right, with a lot of our customers is, they want a lot of freedom, right? Because that freedom will enable them the agility and the velocity that they are looking for. But at the same time, we do need guardrails, right? Because they're important. And I think, how do we gently lock down the environments? I think that's kind of the key, right? I think one way, we can talk about this, right, is that, when we think about that infrastructure as code, right, we're really talking about, codifying the entire environment under which your application is running in the cloud. And what that actually enables, us to do is be able to then say, how do we actually remediate, right? Like, how do we actually focus on automation that doesn't always just point out all the challenges or all the problems in that code around security, but then taking it that last mile, as I like to think about it, which is actually fixing it for that developer, right? So I think that's really where the trends are, and I think that's really where things need to be, right? Is really say, hey, I analyze this infrastructure as code. I have identified where all of the security challenges are. Here's how to risk appropriately secure this code, because all of this infrastructure as code is declarative. So it's predictable in how it can be changed and what the impacts would be. So I think that's really where it needs to be is, when I look at, some of our customers and infrastructure as code is getting pretty complex, right? So, we have customers that have 40, 50, 60,000 lines of Terraform code. So even at cloud infrastructure code or infrastructure code itself is getting pretty complex. So no security engineers or no number of security engineers or even DevOps or developer can actually keep up with understanding what are all the security implications in this code, right? So the real answer in my mind is, how do we automate this thing, take it to the last mile and say, hey, here are all the recommended changes in this code as far as the security aspects of it is concerned. So as a developer, now I can focus on the functional aspects, and I have an automated tool or an automated process that will really enable me to then not have to worry about the security aspects of that infrastructure as code.
And maybe no one ever needs to know how much I don't know about security. But do you think that we're going to see a lot more of so-called artificial intelligence thrown at this problem? And is that part of this automation curve? Or, are we making too much of AI and security these days, and it's just going to require something a little more fundamental?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, right? But I think my opinion is that AI kind of gets thrown around a lot, and I think when we're talking about some of the deeper deep learning concepts in AI, or if we're talking about some neural network things, I think those things are coming, but I think we still have to. We're in the infancy stages of this, right? So I think really, to me, it starts with the fundamentals first, right? Can we actually, provide these recommendations, this automation to really help educate the user, that developer, right? That practitioner that is today, a lot more often than not is kind of, utilizing a lot of the modularized code that's available in the web without really understanding, what are the implications as it relates to their own world or their own applications or their own context. And let me sort of dive in a deeper, right? So not all applications or workloads in the cloud are created equal, right? So if you are a healthcare company that's securing a healthcare applications that's utilized by your patients, that's using PII data, their requirements around security may be completely different than if I am building a marketing website where most of the data that's on that website is publicly available, right? Not both of those applications are not created equal, right? So how do we secure those two different applications is actually different. So there's an element of this dynamic nature. There's element of understanding what are the requirements of that application, what are maybe the compliance adherence to those applications. So really then when we talk about securing those two applications, that's also different, right? So it's really what I think about the context behind that application, and how you secure that application really becomes important, or a focal point of then what are the recommendations that you're providing to that end user, that developer within that infrastructure as code. So I think that has to taken into consideration. And then I think to your point, right, I think to me, it's not simply just, saying, hey, here are the 10 things you need to do, developer, go and here's a tool that will actually remediate it for you. That's great, right? But I think part of it can be used really as an educational tool to really better understand, hey, developer, help us a little bit, help us understand the context of this application, right? What is it that you're trying to do? And then I think once you kind of cover those fundamentals, then I think as we go deeper beyond the infancy stages of this cloud infrastructure journey, then I think what we can do is we can learn behaviors. We can learn from the industry that this developer or this organization is in, and we can say, yeah, this is a healthcare industry vertical, or this is a particular type of architecture or workload that's being deployed in the cloud and secured. And then I think we can start to get into intelligence around deep learning and other heuristics to say, hey, how do we react to then risk appropriately secure this application, right? Because otherwise what we're doing is if we start treating all applications, all workloads that run in the cloud in the same way, there's a lot more that we're asking of the developer. There might be hundreds of things that we need to do to risk appropriately secure a healthcare application that's using PII data versus, we might only need to do, a handful of things to ensure that a marketing website that has publicly available data is secure.
What will be the role of the security team in all of this? Because one of the things that comes to mind is if we are shifting more responsibility, or at least enablement left, then what exactly does the security team need to do to kind of work alongside that? Or will they just kind of set the policies and the rest of it will be automated?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first and foremost, right, I think it's really around, if you think about, if I think about kind of the role of security engineering today in the DevOps world or DevSecOps world, right, is really first and foremost, really understanding and gaining visibility into what's happening, right? Because if, you have engineering teams that are deploying tens of times a day into production, they're fundamentally changing potentially the architecture of that entire application, right? So I'll give you an example. Today, with a lot of the sort of building blocks, or the way I like to think about it is, cloud service providers are really offering these Lego pieces, right? So they're out of the box capabilities. Now I can plug in an analytics service into my architecture and seamlessly provide analytics dashboard into my application or into my workload that I didn't have, a week ago. But that fundamentally changes, or it fundamentally has the ability to change the architecture and therefore the security implications, right? So first and foremost, from the role of security engineering is really getting the visibility as early as possible, so that they can understand how fundamentally this application is changing and what are the security implications of that. So, it's, and I'll say, like, for that aspect of it, right, this is the people process side of embracing DevOps, right, is really engaging that security engineer as early as, having that requirement or having that capability from business that says, hey, we need this analytics dashboard, right? Really getting the security engineering involved as early as possible. And from that point forward, again, then it goes back to technology and automation, right? How can security engineering really understand what are the implications of adding this analytics service from AWS or some analytics service from GCP or Azure? What does that mean for the security of that, the security of my architecture? So there might be hundreds of different configurations. There might be thousands of different implications around putting in that one analytics service that's available out of the box as a feature or service from the cloud service provider. And the reality is no security engineering can actually keep up with that. So having a tool that really understands down to the configuration level, what are the impacts or the configurations of that analytics service to securely deploy that service. And then what security engineering can do is security engineering can say, hey, let me understand the implications and the architecture when my development team is adding this analytics service. And if we start early, if we get the security engineering involved early, if we enable them automation to take away the implications of down to the hundreds of configurations of securely deploying that analytics service away from security engineering, but then give them the visibility, then I think, we have a really great starting point to enable all of the teams to work together with the same operational velocity that that really the dev engineering really desires.
Mm-hmm. What is your best advice to folks? I mean, should I just take all these developers and security people and lock them in a room till somebody comes to an agreement, or is there some more intelligent way to go about this?
Yeah, I think locking everybody up in a room is not the right answer, right? I mean, I think, what I've seen work really well is, there's a lot of different ways to sort of come to a solution, right? I think there's no one silver bullet here, but I think depending on the size of the organization, depending on the size of the teams, I think one of the things that should be done, and I'm starting to see some trending around this, is really, add a security engineer to the engineering team as a whole, right? So you really have a dedicated security engineer that's spending part of the time with these engineering teams, right? So typically we've seen in more of the modern development shops, you see a lot of the dev engineering. It started out with just developers in a single team. Then we kind of focused on Scrum teams, right? So there was development teams, there was a product engineering or a QA involved. We've seen a DevOps engineer or SREs get involved in these teams, and I think that the answer is, again, being able to put that security engineer in these teams as well, to work closely with the developers, work closely with the SREs, because then what will start to happen is that engagement, that early visibility and understanding. So I think that's one. And then I think the other area, right, for a lot of the larger organizations, right, where this may not work, is I think the notion around excellence centers, right? So you have visibility across these little center of excellence teams, right? So there's cloud ops teams, there's security teams. It's really good to incorporate a lot of your security engineering and security architects into these cloud center of excellence teams, because I think then again, it goes back to that visibility, it goes back to engagement, and it goes back to, helping security teams really understand what are the different architectures, what are the different capabilities that a lot of the dev engineering groups are using today, right? Is it the serverless architectures? Is it the microservices that are being built with containerized architectures? And then what security engineering can start to do is they can start to build these reference architectures or guardrails around 80% of recognizing that 80% of the workloads across my organizations are built with serverless architectures, as an example, in the cloud, or it might be the containerized architectures in the cloud. And that will really help them start to build these guardrails in an effective way. And then I think, you talked about sort of early on gently locking down environments. So I think if we then start to think about in the DevOps pipeline, how do we incorporate these security automation tools that enable us, both the development teams, the SRE teams, and the security teams, to identify what are all of the security underpinnings, vulnerabilities, design gaps that we are identifying, be it with the application code, be it with runtime, be it with cloud infrastructure security. So it's really, where possible, building these automated tools within the pipelines, right? Without actually blocking the pipeline, so that what you're doing is you're really enabling the development engineering and the DevOps engineering to really start to build in the process around how do we ensure that all of these security design and the best practices are actually incorporated within the pipeline. And then as the teams learn and grow, then these tools can become those guardrails, right? So maybe you're not blocking or completely blocking the pipeline or failing the pipeline in the development or sandbox stages, but then you start to guardrail those as that feature capability is moving through user acceptance testing or staging or before it goes into production. And I think those are some of the key things that can be done to really enable more of this collaborative but shared responsibility culture that I think is really going to drive a lot of the benefits that are needed to build security in.
Hey, Om, thanks for being on the show. It's all about making sure that if you find a pattern, build a guardrail and rinse and repeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right. Welcome back. That wraps up today's Techstrong TV broadcast. We had a lot of great conversations on today's show. We're going to have a lot of great conversations on the next show also, which is going to be on Thursday, new show. Before I close things out, just want to remind you, we've got a couple events coming up, live in a tech events that are happening I think starting in April. They're one-day conferences in various cities in the United States, regionally kind of located in what we call the oil and gas belt. But we are expanding them this year to also include Washington, D.C. So please do check techstrongevents.com for the lineup for the Inatech events. I think the first one is in Austin in April, and then follow that up with Dallas in May, and then others throughout the year. We also have a series of what we call Techstrong Live events. One is focused on DevOps and cloud native. The other is focused on cybersecurity. We are going to kick off the series of events in Washington, D.C. in mid-April. So do want to check out techstrongevents.com for those as well. And we also have those happening throughout the year in different locations around the United States. So check out the full lineup of those as well. We also have lots of virtual events coming up, and we've got some other live events happening throughout the year as well. All of that, as I said, one more time, techstrongevents.com. You can check out the entire lineup, check out the agendas for them, the lineup of speakers, and register for them. I will be back on Thursday with a brand new Techstrong TV broadcast for you with some really fascinating conversations, as always. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.